There we go. Jesus Christ, boomer tech from me. Well, uh, I'm just going to verify again that I can be heard. Obviously, I couldn't be heard a minute ago. You can hear me now, why? Dogs. So initially, I was going to make a video or no, a stream hours ago, but I fell asleep on this shit show. Wow. I watched the entirety of this. This has got to be, and honestly, hands down, one of the worst videos I have ever seen. One of the worst segments from the Scottish Parliament I've ever seen. Just feminism on steroids. But obviously, I know the amigos are on later on, so I'm not going to go through the entirety of this. But I'll play a few bits in a second. But there's just a few other things that I want to go through as well. Instead of making umpteen videos, there is a video that I've got planned for later on regarding the misogyny report that came out. Just cancer, but stands to reason in this day and age in Rainbow Unicorn Land. But I thought I'd start off with this. So obviously, for anybody that's paid any attention, well, actually, no. How rude of me! I should probably say hello to people in the chat. Who have we got? And we've got Faith. How's it going? D. Lafferty. Don't think I've seen you before. Hello. Wee Davy boy. How's it going? And obviously, Big Bad William. Happy days. I don't know if I've missed anybody else of that. No. Aye. So, for anybody that's paid any attention to politics in Scotland for the last week or so, I know that the vast majority of politicians up and down the UK, irrespective of country or nation, whatever, they're all yammering on to no end about refugees coming into the country. But the SNP, they just seem to be going above and beyond when it comes to not only advocating for them to come here or calling for them to come here, they're essentially demanding, borderline begging for them to come here. And I find it very bizarre, if I'm in all honesty. They don't even make that much of a fuss when it comes to Pakistani or Afghani or Syrian or African refugees, quote, quote. But when it comes to the Ukrainians, But the other thing as well that I find kind of laughable about it is the fact that they assume that anybody that's intending to come to the UK has Scotland as their final destination. The vast majority of them will probably end up in England as well. So you could see that from the point of view that it's a bit of a fucking cheek for the SNP to continuously demand that the UK does more, knowing full well that the vast majority of the people that could come as a result of their demands won't even end up here in the first place, or at the end of the day, I should say. But this was just a few days ago. UK refugee resettlement, a letter to the Prime Minister from Nicola Thinlips, of course. You know, she's going above and beyond, as I say. And this was a few days ago. Don't limit Ukraine refugee numbers. So essentially, hypothetically speaking, of course, it would be an endless flow if Nicola Thinlips had her way. This woman never knows when to shut the fuck up, if I'm being totally honest. But so she's written a letter. Pretty sure now it's been signed by all the leaders in Holyrood, of course, all the wet wipes. You know, stands to reason, they're all the same party essentially in that tin pot parliament. But it says here, as we witness the worst humanitarian crisis in Europe since World War II, and with more than 2 million Ukrainians now having fled since the Russian invasion began, the UK must take action and respond fully with humanity and compassion. The desperation of those fleeing and displaced by the war in Ukraine are clearly distressing and heart-rending. We cannot and must not turn our back on the people of Ukraine. Right? Goes on and on and on. Here's it here. It is neither reasonable nor morally acceptable to expect people fleeing war to go through complex bureaucratic processes in order to reach safety within the UK. Therefore, we urge you to follow the example of European countries, including the Republic of Ireland, by waiving all visa requirements for any Ukrainian nationals seeking refuge in the UK, as well as implementing the temporary protection regulations. We must provide sanctuary first and treat people with respect and humanity. And it's just fucking cringe here. Scotland stands in solidarity with the people of Ukraine and deeply wishes to provide them with practical support, aid, and refuge. really wish the SNP would stop speaking on my behalf or Scotland's behalf when in reality they're just speaking for themselves. Anyway, I'm not saying that in a denigrating way to Ukrainian people, obviously. I'm just saying when they say things such as Scotland stands in solidarity, Scotland deeply wishes X, Y, Z. What do you mean we wish? The country wishes. The government is already working with local authorities and the Refugee Council to make sure that our communities are ready to welcome Ukrainian refugees as soon as they're able to come here and ensure that they have the support they need. More than a week after it was announced on the 1st of March, we urge you to set out the details of the humanitarian sponsorship pathway, including when it will open and confirmation that the government will provide the flexibility and the financial support needed to allow us in Scotland and communities across the UK to contribute. This fucking word, contribute. That guy, Scott Webb, I don't know if anybody's familiar with him. He made a video a few days ago covering a video that I'd done in actuality. I won't play it, but I'll just get it up quickly and post it in the chat. He essentially went over a video that I'd done and just added his 2 cents to it. And it was about the SNP and their obsession with calling and demanding for refugees to come here from Ukraine. What's it called? And a very good point that he made that I actually don't really address that often was the fact that while the SNP are calling to no end for refugees to come here, homelessness, for example, is still completely overlooked, or lengthy and expanding in terms of length. Council waiting lists is another one, completely overlooked. Where are these people supposed to go? That's if they end up in Scotland, as I said. The vast majority of them will probably end up in England, but where are they supposed to go? And he brings up homeless housing and homeless statistics. It's a bit blurry, yeah. Fuck it, doesn't matter. I'll post it in the chat though. But he made a good point. But it doesn't stop the SNP. Never does. Just as my video was titled, he covered, or went over, I should say, the SNP act as if the UK's got unlimited resources in space. That is the way that they operate, or they act, I should say. Nonetheless, 2 seconds. There's that video there. Back to this. But it's a good point, though. Homelessness on the rise, even this cost of living crisis and whatnot. There's going to be a lot of people that are going to have a lot of problems in the future, in the upcoming months, and yet they just expect Ukrainians to slot in. Nice as you like. I can joke, man. And a point I've made as well, I genuinely think that there's an ulterior motive at play here, when it comes to this Ukrainian shit, in terms of the refugees, so the safe legal corridors and all this shit. I can't help but feel if they start bending the rules and start waiving the need to showcase visas until after the fact, or go through the paperwork after the fact, that's going to leave the door wide open to BAMEs. We're already starting to see BAMEs coming over into Europe via the Ukrainian quote-unquote crisis, or refugee crisis, I should say. But very peculiar, if you ask me. Anyway, where are we? As a further demonstration of this solidarity, the following leaders of Scotland's political parties have co-signed this letter. I hope you will agree with our collective call for urgent action to be taken by the UK government in dealing with this crisis to allow people to enter the UK and provide a comprehensive and funded settlement programme and package of support for those seeking refuge. So as I say, all the leaders have signed this in Scotland. Nicola Thinlips, of course, Anassel Sawar, Patrick Non-Binary Harvey, the lesbian questionable woman, Lorna Slater, and Beta Boy, Alex Colehammon. Wow, well, Douglas Ross hasn't. Oh, her brave, her bold. But so this was her as well. As I say, don't limit Ukraine refugee numbers. And I was like, what the fucking... she really is insufferable. Truly insufferable. First Minister said she would not put an arbitrary number on how many could seek safety in Scotland. The government is working with councils on the practicalities of how to house people fleeing the conflict. Thinlips said the UK has been very strong in setting sanctions on Russia, but was failing woefully short on opening its doors to refugees. I mean, why the fuck do we need to take them in? I mean, it's a serious question. I mean, why can't they go to countries nearby the way that it used to be back in the day? There's fucking nonsense about having an obligation all the time crisis, quote unquote, after crisis, there's always a duty or an obligation for us to take in people and do more. Fucking do more, do one. So, this as well. It was a quote in here that really fucked me off from Nicola Thinlips. So, of course, surprise, surprise. Well, no surprises, I should say. Obviously, with her campaign promise to hold a referendum before the end of 2023, naturally you're going to start to hear upticks to some degree in independence rhetoric, and then 2023 will come around and they won't get the referendum, and then lo and behold, we'll repeat the same process again when it comes to next election, the same way that it's been operating since 2017. Nonetheless, she's confirmed India F2 will happen next year despite Ukraine invasion. Even the headline itself is totally misleading because this is all completely dependent on whether or not the UK government agrees or not. And they're not going to. So this is a waste of time. However, she goes on to say down here, immediately, it's referencing refugees, of course. Thinlips also said she wanted an independent Scotland to be a country which welcomes refugees. Okay, yeah, let's vote for independence just so we can welcome refugees. In an apparent dig at the UK government, who have been criticised for their lacklustre response. The First Minister previously committed to holding a second independence referendum in 2023 and was a manifesto pledge of the SNP in the Holyrood elections. It comes after Westminster leader Ian Bater-Blackford appeared to suggest that the timetable for a second independence referendum should be flexible due to the conflict currently raging in Ukraine. He said, I want that referendum to take place in a timely manner. I want us to be able to execute the mandate that we have. To those that are expressing a desire for us to get on with our job, of course, we will do so, but we have to be mindful of where we are. However, in an interview with LBC, Nicola Thinlips was asked if current events in Europe had influenced her thinking on the referendum timetable. And there she is. Seriously, I fucking hairdo. I cannot put it into words. The words evade me. That is just not acceptable. It's just not fucking acceptable. Anyway, sort of fucking hair you'd expect after like being a prisoner of war or some shit. I don't know. Anyway, Thinlips said, "My plans and my thinking haven't changed. We right now should be reminded, above all else, how lucky we are to live in a free democracy where we can put forward our case for political constitutional change, argue that case passionately, wherever our views on that might be, and trust people to decide." The absolute laugh is saying that we live in a democracy, you know? Name me one fucking party that doesn't peddle the climate crisis narrative. Name me one party that went against the COVID regime or went against the narrative of COVID. They're all in lockstep in one shape or form. The only differences that really appear between the parties in Holyrood is whether or not, they'll have a wee bit of a back and forth in terms of policies ain't going far enough or policies are happening too quickly, etc., etc. But there's never any actual pushback. They're all in agreement that there's a climate crisis. They're all in agreement that the planet's going to burn up cinder unless Nicola Thinlips socially engineers the public and implements net zero targets. They were all in total agreement that vaccines work. They were all in total agreement that the big bad coof was out there and was going to get us all. So, yeah, we live in a fucking democracy. Of course we do. No, they pick who you get to pick from. Dogs and ponies. Anyway, well, that's the way I see it. We previously told how support for whatever. Where's the bit here down here? Because I'm unconscious of time, obviously. Yeah. Here we go. Thinlips said that Scottish independence will allow the country to play a bigger role in the humanitarian response. Yes, this is what I was on about like about 10 minutes ago when I said that there's just this constant fucking shit about obligations and moral duties and all the rest of it. There's another one, humanitarian response. And when this Ukraine crisis, quote quote's over, there'll be another crisis. And yet again, we will have moral obligations, etc. Since fucking when? However, that's not really selling the idea of independence to me. Not that it is independence for anybody with half a brain, but, I mean, legitimate Scottish nationalists that want independence in Scotland, I mean, they must shudder at this fucking rhetoric. I know I do. However, Boris Johnson and Home Secretary Priti Patel have been heavily criticised for refusing to waive visas for Ukrainian refugees. Last week, it was revealed that only 50 visa applications, whatever, right? This is irrelevant. Thinlips said, "I support independence for a whole variety of reasons." Oh, yeah, sure you do. Yeah. But one of the motivations for my support for independence is to see Scotland play here we go again, to play a bigger role, albeit as a small country, in building a more peaceful world. Oh my, to be progressive. Oh yeah, constructive international partner. A constructive international partner. To be a progressive country that welcomes refugees. And see Scotland as part of a sanctuary, a place of sanctuary, a place of sanctuary. Yeah, a country that sees the benefits we stand to gain from having people come here and make a contribution to our society. Oh, there's that word contribution again. And I don't give a shit whether or not Abdul comes over here and he's as big brain as it gets and he becomes a top-notch doctor or a top-notch engineer. That said, I also don't give a shit if Abdul comes over here and he's a lame brain and can't add 2 and 2 together. Because as far as I'm concerned, Abdul should not be here. You know, charity begins at home for one, and at the end of the day, the long-term strategy, the long-term goal of these individuals, because there's a political consensus across the board, is replacement migration to rectify our aging birth rate issues. So, quite frankly, you can shove your progressive shite, but the sun don't shine. No matter what way they try to sugarcoat this, the reality of the matter is they're just trying everything in their power to ensure that they have a population in the future in order to keep the economy, the well-being economies, somehow flowing to a certain extent. Shove it. Fucking shove it. Anyway, and actually all of these issues right now, I think, are brought into sharp focus by the tragedy that is unfolding in Ukraine. So bold, so brave. Fuck. We're getting there, like. Let's see what the chat's saying. I came across this as well, just purely by chance earlier on today. What a load of nonsense. Absolute nonsense. Intersectionality and policy making. Scottish Government's website. Fucking. It never ends. It never ends. Who we got here? Shit. Good fit. What's the crack with you? Are you from? I thought you were from England, dude. So are you foreign? I don't mean that in a derogatory manner. Like, I'm just meaning the way that you type. Very strange. Very, very strange. What we got? Narcissistic personality disorder people are delusional. Shilly for the globalists. Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. I mean, I've said it before. I genuinely think that Nicola Thinlips has fallen into the illusion of actually believing that the policies that she's advocating for are her own, that are her ideas, etc. I think she's completely forgotten the reality of the matter, that she's just a pawn. You know, people might say that's a conspiratorial take from me, but just look at the COVID shit that happened for the last 2 years. You know, like, she did nothing different to any other country, really. So anybody that thinks that she's not a puppet, think again, as far as I'm concerned. You did miss a wee bit of Nicola Thinlips bashing earlier on, but there might be a bit more of that. My grand finale for this, it won't be a long stream, as I say, because the amigos are on. I mean, I might run over a wee bit, but I acknowledge that the vast majority of people are probably going to fuck off anyway when that comes on. Don't blame them, and it's my own fault for falling asleep earlier on, but this absolute belter. And the first speaker, of course, is none other than Nicola Thinlips. Just absolute cringe. I mean, in fact, cringe is probably the wrong word to use in this respect. I mean, this is just a bunch of feminists, obviously, and they've got a worldview, an ideology, but they're all reading from scripts, and they've just taken bits and pieces from this worldview, this ideology, and they're presenting it as if it's fact, and they're all just bouncing off each other in this fucking circle jerk. Now, that wouldn't really be an issue in and of itself, but the reality of the matter is that this sort of unchallenged rhetoric and narrative, language, etc., has given way to policies being pushed on the back of it, implemented on the back of it, such as this misogyny report, which I just think's absolute cancer. The hate crime bill in Scotland, obviously. They initially had sex as a protected characteristic, and the feminist organizations created merry hell Obviously, because sex incorporated or included men as well as women. And we can't be having that here in Rainbow Unicorn Lab because we need to be able to bash white men. Straight white men, that is. So, so they took sex out and decided to create a working group to decide whether or not misogyny should be added as a standalone offence at a later date. And lo and behold, fast forward to the present day, and the report came out several days ago, which is what my video will be on later on at some point over the course of the weekend. It's just tedious, if I'm honest. But so I came across this fucking nonsense as well. I'm not going to go through all of it tonight because, quite frankly, I don't want to waste my own time, nor anybody else's. But intersectionality, it's good to know that the Scottish Parliament, the Scottish Government, they're getting on with the day job, More and more and more these days, they seem to all be adopting the roles of social engineers as opposed to politicians. They're elected and hypothetically, or theoretically, I should say, speaking, they're supposed to be public servants to a certain extent. They're supposed to represent their local communities, their constituents, their constituency. But instead of that, they all seem to have adopted this notion that they're all social engineers, or they all agree to the concept of socially engineering the public. And Nicola Finlips is the arbiter of all things social engineering. But this pish here. This summary presents key findings on the concept and applications of intersectionality. Together with the main report, it is intended as a resource to build knowledge and the expertise among public sector analysts and policymakers. What intersectionality means and how it can be applied to policymaking, how intersectionality can be integrated throughout the analytical process, and examples of how the concept of intersectionality have been used is all the sort of things you can expect in this absolute shit show. So they go on to define intersectionality here, and I love that intersectionality, of course, is a theory. Bear that in mind, emphasis on the word theory, because it's not actually a proven concept. It's a fucking theory, but it's still, it runs amok here in Rainbow Unicorn Land, of course. The term intersectionality is not yet in everyday usage, but awareness is growing. Yeah. The concept has been used to articulate and analyze the lived reality of those who experience multiple inequalities, particularly within Black feminism. Fucking Black feminism, what? The analysis framework and term intersectionality was originally coined by an American critical legal race scholar, Kimberly Williams Crenshaw, who used the term to refer to the double discrimination of racism and sexism faced by Black women. Define racism and define sexism in this modern day. Based on the previous work, the foundational elements of intersectionality can be understood as a recognition that people are shaped by their simultaneous membership of multiple interconnected social categories. Yeah, they create all these little tick boxes, these societal categories, these societal boxes, and you slot into X, Y, and Z. Yeah, maybe if you just eradicated the concept that there's a multitude of social categories out there, maybe all this bullshit would just dissipate. But nah. The interaction between multiple social categories occurs within the context of connected systems and structures of power. Structures of fucking power. A recognition of inequality of power is key to intersectionality. Yes, power. This is really starting to get on my nerves. It's the same as how they redefine racism. It's privilege plus power now, and this word power. So that's why they're always advocating for more women in Parliament, or one of the many reasons for, at least 50-50 male to female representation in Parliament, at least 50% female. So it could be 60 and that would still be acceptable, but it's all about the power. So because it's 45% female just now, they lack a semblance of power, a measly 5% of power. And it's all about power, apparently. It's just fucking ludicrous. Absolutely ludicrous. Structural inequalities reflect as relative disadvantage and privilege are the outcomes of the interaction between social categories, power relations, and contexts. As a result, an individual's experience of inequality can be chronic or transitory, creating unique lived experience. It's just waffle. It's absolute fucking waffle. And again, this in and of itself, they can type whatever pish they want. They can waste their time, invest their time in conjuring up publications all they want. But the reality of the matter is, as I said, this is all about, understanding intersectionality in the context of how it can be implemented into policymaking. So this is something that in time will begin to affect policy. So it's not a case of just ignoring it. Waffle, yes. Malevolent, yes. Fucking hell. Democracy, who the fuck voted for this? Who voted for this? I don't even think any of the SNP braidlets would have voted for this shit. I'll tell you why they wouldn't have voted for it, because it was never included in any manifestos that I'm aware of. So why are we now starting to talk about implementing intersectionality into policies? Anyway, let's see what this one says. The intersectional approach can be understood as a way of identifying, understanding, and tackling structural inequality in a given context that accounts for the lived experience of people with intersecting identities. For example, intersectionality helps us to understand how people experience services such as education and healthcare differently as a result of their identity. An unequal power dynamic. Oh, the power dynamics, you know. Tyrone the BAME can't get a job, or Tyrone the BAME struggles to get a job because there isn't enough Tyrones and Abduls in Parliament. That power dynamic, eh? An intersectional approach means that policymakers, and analysts, do not give a higher status to any one social category's inequality or experience of discrimination, but encourages us to focus on complex relationships and interactions. The waffle. Analyze their own power dynamics as much as the world they wish to change. An intersectional approach asks policymakers to assess how their own experience impact on the ability to develop, deliver, and evaluate policies in an equitable way. Yes, to chop and change the term equality for equity or equitable when it suits them, but that's what they really mean. Equitable way. So what do they mean when they talk about equity? So, well, the narrative, of course, is every group in society in Scotland is marginalised except from straight, able-bodied white men. So that's the reason we need to put things in place in order to give all of these different groups a leg up, a helping hand, at the detriment of white men, of course. Equity. Go fuck yourself, man. I'm getting sick of this piss. Put evidence into context, including historical and contemporary structures. The structures, of inequality in wider society and within local contexts. Local context could include, for example, education, employment, and healthcare. And of course, they'll say that education is rife with inequality because there isn't enough BAME teachers. Or they'll say that healthcare is rife with inequality because there's too many women in lower paid sectors of the healthcare industry. And when it comes to employment in general, they'll go on about how it's rife with inequality because there's too many women in low-paid jobs, not enough BAMEs in leadership roles. We're not dealing with people that are using the definitions of old. They're just taking words that initially had meaning, and they're just redefining them to suit their own agenda, pointing to disparities and proclaiming that more needs to be done in order to rectify said disparities. We lived in a meritocracy. We sure as fuck don't now. But the more that they meddle, the more that they piss about trying to make things equal, the more that they ironically make things more unequal. But I think they know that deep down. I think they know damn well what they're doing, or the vast majority of them do. Conscious of time, as I said, I'm not going to go for too much more of this pish, but there was another bit here which started yammering on about racism. It's like, what the fuck? What? It might be this bit or the one below it. All of us marginalised, define marginalised. That's every group are straight, able-bodied white men, of course. How are they marginalised? Because of the patriarchy and oppression. Yeah, my bad. Adopting an intersectional approach to analysis requires that people with different intersecting identities, particularly from multiple marginalised groups, be included in research so that their voices are heard. Okay. Where was the bit about racism, though? It must be this one. Just pish, absolute whiffity waffle. This section outlines how intersectionality can be integrated throughout the analytical process. What? Oh, shit. An intersectional approach can cast light on the lived experiences of people with intersecting identities and can be used to develop policies and services that tackle structural inequality. One example of where an intersectional approach has been used to identify and understand structural inequality is provided here. See the main report for more examples. An example that they give is research looking at the impact of the CUF has found that the minority ethnic group people are more likely to contract and experience serious outcomes from the CUF. During the first 6 months of the pandemic, people from minority ethnic groups in England, you can't refer to Scotland, were almost 3 times as likely to contract the CUF and 5 times more likely to experience serious health outcomes. In Scotland, National Records of Scotland found that between the 12th of March and the 30th of September, The deaths amongst people with Pakistani ethnicity were 3.7 times higher. 3.7 times as likely. Wait, what? 3.7 times as likely to involve the Kuf as people with white Scottish ethnicity. Deaths amongst people with the Chinese ethnicity, 1.7 times as likely. Indian ethnicity, 1.7 times, blah, blah, were more likely to involve the Kuf than people with the white Scottish ethnicity. Taking account of a range of factors demonstrates that the link between being a member of a minority ethnic group and a heightened risk of contracting and experiencing serious outcomes from COVID is not direct. Looking across evidence from Scotland, England, and across the UK, a number of mediating factors were identified, including socio-economic circumstance. Research suggests that individuals from minority ethnic groups are more likely to have had to work outside. Okay, then whose fault's that? What the fuck, like? Oh wow! Again, so there needs to be. Let's just hypothesize here and say that the majority of the people they're speaking about here worked in garden centres or the building trade, for example. And there isn't, where I live anyway, there isn't any BAMEs really in the building sites. But so there's a disparity there. There's too many BAMEs having to work outside. So that's inequality, according to these individuals. So that needs to be rectified. So we need to have an equal amount of whites as well as BAMEs working outside. And until such a time as it's 50-50 on paper, or equal on paper, it is a clear-cut example of inequality. That is just how lame brain this gets. But anyway, I just find that remarkable. That that is referenced as if it's something that we're responsible for or something that we should give a shit about. That's their own choice whether or not they decided to take a job where they have to work outside. Work outside of their home during the national lockdown are more likely to work in occupations with a higher risk of COVID exposure, such as health and social care. COVID disparities between different minority ethnic groups may be due to reduced access to healthcare. Analysis by the Institute for Public Policy indicates that in England, the 10 most deprived authorities have experienced 50% of all public health budget cuts in the past 5 years. The effects of lockdown, according to the Runnymede Trust, people from Bangladeshi and Black African groups were most likely to report loss of income since the KUF, compared with 22% of white people. White people. And so we're just going to lump all the whites in together at this point now. So, you know. Okay, whatever. Those from Black and minority ethnic groups were also more likely to have used savings for day-to-day spending compared with those from white British backgrounds. In addition, Key and colleagues highlighted that when considering health inequalities and potential ethnicity-related vulnerabilities, it is important to understand the historical context. This is a key tenet of intersectionality. Previous global influenza pandemics and infectious diseases epidemics have clearly show a clear association between poverty and increased transmission. And then there's the context of racism and discrimination experienced by BAMEs, particularly minority ethnic key workers, is vital to understanding health risks, exposure risk, and disease progression. Issues of stigma with the KUF were identified as negatively impacting health-seeking behaviours. Fear of diagnosis and death in the KUF was identified as negatively impacting how minority ethnic groups took up opportunities to get tested and the likelihood of presenting early for treatment and care. For many BAMEs, lack of trust in NHS service and healthcare treatment resulted in the reluctance to seek care on a timely basis and late presentation with disease. How's any of that our fault? But anyway, so you get the gist of this shit. So to summarize here, or to conclude this part, I should say, it goes on to say here that differential exposures to the KUF due to occupation, exposure, income, and housing issues faced by those seeking asylum, living conditions, poverty, racism, and discrimination, and a lack of understanding of Scotland's ethnic diversity. A lack of understanding of Scotland's ethnic diversity. You know, if we all get educated on Scotland's so-called ethnic diversity, things will change, or it will go a long way in changing things. All right, aye. Different vulnerabilities due to health inequalities and differential access to treatments and other forms of support, including a greater risk to adverse outcomes even after hospitalisation, barriers to accessing the NHS services among migrants, and experiences of discrimination when accessing health services. Whatever. So anyway, again, conscious of the time. I wish I didn't fall asleep earlier on. There's more to do. I'll see you in the chat, and then I'll brighten everybody's day with some of this shit. I mean, honest to God. Oh, God. Anyway, let's see what's what. Isn't calling these people BAMs a bit racist? BAMs? I never called them BAMs. I call them BAMs. But they are BAMs, to be honest. Who else have we? My people die due to ignorance and poor nutrition. My people die due to ignorance. My people? Are you a BAME? Oh, well. Yeah. And vitamin deficiency, vitamin D deficiency as well. And obviously a reluctance to trust the science, trust the government, trust advice and whatnot. Not that the rules ever work to begin with, but but it's easier to say that there's a pandemic of racism than there is to, address any of the blatantly observable reasons as to why BAMEs were affected more than your average white was. Anyway, yes, well, there you go. Somebody said it before I said it. Great minds think alike and all that shite. My laugh, yeah. None of that shite, all right. Well, I mean, I lost pretty much fucking everything during the coup shit, but where's my representation from the parliament? Where's the politicians sitting there saying that some whites struggled adversely? No, we don't hear about that, do we? Doesn't suit the narrative, of course. But anyway, this shit here, wait till you see this. Wow, I need to get... Let's go.
Women's Day means for us here in Scotland. But this is also an opportunity to show solidarity to women and girls across the globe,
what's going on?
Or at least those on the line of conflict and war. Today in particular, I know thoughts are with the women and girls of Ukraine. Ukraine is one of the countries across the world that marked International Women's Day with a public holiday. This time last year, thousands marched through the streets of its capital city, Kyiv, to demand gender equality. Today, the reality could not be more different. Kyiv and cities across Ukraine are under brutal Russian bombardment. Far from participating in peaceful democratic protest, Ukrainians are now fighting and fleeing for their lives. So today, from our national parliament here in Edinburgh, Kyiv's twin city, let us send the women and girls, men and boys of Ukraine our love, solidarity and support. But let us also, presiding officer, send this message. In the face of the horror engulfing Ukraine, words are not enough. In the past 10 days alone, more than 2 million people have already fled the horrors of war. That number is rising rapidly. The majority of those seeking refuge are women and children. So far, the UK's response has fallen short. Today, on International Women's Day, I appeal to the UK government to follow the example of Ireland and other EU countries. Refuge and sanctuary first, bureaucracy second. Let people in and do the paperwork afterwards. Let's open not just our hearts, but also our doors. Our common humanity demands it. Presiding officer, the theme of this year's International Women's Day is break the bias. 3 short words that mask the scale of the task we face if we are to ensure equality for women and girls here at home and across the globe. The bias we seek to break is ingrained. Its roots are deeply historic, and I'll reflect on that point later. But its impacts are very current, and all women experience it in some way, shape or form. Of course, for minority ethnic women, disabled women...
All women face it. Of course, they've totally defined what misogyny means. Used to mean a contempt for women or a hatred for women. Now it just means whatever the fuck they want it to mean. But anyway, here she goes, rattling off all the intersectional characteristics now. All the BAME women and all the disabled women and all the trannies, or we'll actually talk about them yet.
And women lesbians, the impact is compounded. The bias we must break encapsulates prejudice and discrimination, outdated gender stereotypes, sexism and misogyny.
Oh, the misogyny. This is the common theme throughout the entirety of this 2.5-hour shit show. You know, they've got the absolute fucking audacity to label it a debate. I hate when they do that. It's not a debate at all. There's not one person that stands up at their podium to say, this is a load of shite. Not one. A couple of guys come on about halfway through, and I have never seen a more excruciating performance than before these men appeared on their podiums. You thought the feminists were bad here in Rainbow Unicorn Land. Wait till you see completely castrated white men. It's just painful. Sitting there, I agree. We need to change our behaviour. Misogyny's right. Misogyny's wrong. Where you fucking go? You know what I mean? Well, this pish bias. This is the common thread throughout the entirety of this 2-hour thing. Bias and outdated stereotypes. And, the outdated stereotypes, what are they referring to? Well, women are seen natural. Apparently, anyway. Now, I know that historically speaking, of course, women were seen as the caregivers, were seen as the homeowner or would stay at home, I should say, looking after the children, were more likely to prioritize family life as opposed to setting sail into the big bad world of work. But that's now classified as an outdated stereotype, but it's a stereotype that doesn't really exist anymore at this point in time, for better or for worse. I would argue for worse. But these people quite a lot of them, they will stand up at their podium throughout this fucking so-called debate, and they will all say the same things in reference to outdated stereotypes, as if this is a common thought that we all have. Nobody looks at women these days in Scotland, really, and assumes that they are staying at home with the children, or you might deep down think it, but it's not expected of them in this day and age, and it's become an accepted part of reality that the vast majority of women are just seen as merely another statistic in the workforce at this point. There's no aspirations or desire to settle down and start a family anymore. No, it's all about getting a job, really. So I don't know what the fuck she's talking about, but of course it's, if you play that shit to its logical conclusion, and some people in this do make reference to the fact that we need to change education, we need to go into the education system, and we need to change the mindsets of little boys. We need to re-educate them, essentially. So again, it's the feminist shit. Any excuse to promote feminist fucking nonsense in this country, thanks to this thin-lipped, helmet-headed fucker. But she's a nationalist, apparently. A nationalist, a nationalist. The only nationalistic tendencies that woman may or may not have had at some point dissipated when her fucking top lip dissipated. And anyway, so many of them, they even go on to start talking about Sarah Everard and rape and domestic abuse, as if domestic abuse doesn't happen the other way around, as if lesbians don't interact or involve themselves in domestic abuse as well. But the narrative that they portray during this shit, and this isn't the first time they've done this, they try to insinuate that domestic abuse occurs because of outdated stereotypes and misogyny. So if we go into the schools and the nurseries and we educate little boys, they will grow up not to rape, not to murder, or not to get involved in domestic abuse. Now, that narrative would only make fucking sense if 100% of domestic violence cases was men on women. But the fact of the matter is, women do it to men, and other women do it to other women. So when a woman beats up her male partner at home, or psychologically abuses him, or whatever it may be, a domestic abuse case, is that due to systemic barriers and outdated stereotypes? No, it's not. So why the fuck is it to do with outdated stereotypes when it's the other way around? It's not, is it? It's just an excuse to promote feminism. Yet again, you bull-cut-headed bullfrog. Of course. But I'm preaching to the choir at this point. It's so fucking obvious.
Attitudes that have no place in modern society.
What fucking attitudes? What attitudes? I'm not wasting my time going through all this shit. You might think it, 2.5 hours, but it's important to listen to some of this shit. Not only the waffle that they all come away with, but hidden in and amongst all the waffle that they come away with, and the circle jerks and the pat in the back and all the rest of it, and all claiming that they're all fucking oppressed. There is constant references to policies that are in the pipeline, and they're hidden gems, essentially. So it's always important to keep an eye on these things when they appear in the Parliament's YouTube channel, because you ain't going to hear about it in the paper.
which still shape and limit the lives of women on a daily basis.
Oh, a daily fucking basis. I didn't realise women here had it so fucking hard.
Should result in the systematic underrepresentation of women. The result
the underrepresentation. Here we go, the penny drops. There's not enough women in Parliament. Oh, till that changes, women are just going to be in an endless cycle of oppression. Oh, fucking hell.
In the undervaluing of the contribution women make to our society. And they result in too many women living in perennial fear of harassment, abuse, domestic and sexual violence, and in too many...
Do you mean they're in perpetual fear about domestic violence? So fuck, like, the vast majority of relationships, there's no domestic violence at all. And that's for this notion that women can't go anywhere without the thought of being raped, etc. These people never considered that maybe they might be playing a role in that in terms of constantly pushing this narrative that there's a rape culture and every man's out to get them. And ironically enough, why are they advocating constantly for Syrians, quote unquote Syrians, and all these people come over here when we all know what they like to get up to, eh? But, more to the point, I'm not disputing that there isn't some men out there that are fucking lowlifes and do things that they shouldn't do at all and think in a way that they shouldn't think. But for the vast majority of them, they're just not wired up right. It's not a case of outdated stereotypes. It's not a case of being told when they were in nursery that women should be in the fucking kitchen. But the vast majority of men ain't like that. So this notion that women can't go anywhere without men prowling, etc., etc., it's just fucking nonsense. And of course, there's plenty of areas within Scotland, within society, even where I live, that back in the day when I used to roam about on my way home and whatnot after a night out, I'd be a bit nervous walking through. It's not just a case of being a woman. It can happen when you're a man too. Not to mention, of course, that, rape might be more likely for a woman to be a victim of. But being battered, being jumped, being attacked physically, more likely to happen if you're a man. No mention of that, the way. Fucking thing of arsehole.
Many cases, murder. Breaking the bias must mean changing all of that, or it will mean nothing at all. And let's be clear, it is not women who need to change. What must change is a culture in which prejudice, sexism and misogyny still thrive. International Women's Day is, of course, a time to take stock of progress made. And there has been progress. I stand here as the first woman to hold the office of First Minister. I lead a gender-balanced cabinet. 45% of this Parliament's members are women, and albeit very belatedly, we now count amongst our number women of colour.
Very belatedly, there's a few other people make reference to this as if it's a long time coming. It's unacceptable that it's taken all this time in order to get a couple of babes into Parliament or babe women into Parliament. People forgetting how many babes were in Scotland in 2001, around about the time when the Parliament was created. The 2001 census, it was 2% non-white. 2011, it was 4%. What the fuck they expecting a miracle like? So out of that 2%, how many were politically minded? And even for the ones that were politically minded, it's not just a case of, you're babes, you're going to get the job. Well, you could say that about Kebab Stewart, now for Kebab Stewart, the SNP one. The only reason she got that fucking position in the first place is because she stood in a seat where there was an SNP person standing down. Sly one. This nonsense about 50-50, it needs to be 50-50. And until such a time, that's inequality. It's not inequality.
All of that is progress, and it is helping drive deeper change.
Deeper change. Just slots a woman into Parliament, and that is driving deeper change, apparently. How? How? Tell me exactly what are they doing in that Parliament that a man couldn't do exactly? There's nothing different.
World's first comprehensive women's health plan. Free period products, removing for women and girls both the financial cost and the stigma of periods.
The stigma of periods. Fuck me talking about the fucking stigma of periods. I'm convinced they just make shit up. I mean, I've never heard. I mean, even the term period poverty I find laughable. Periods are sanitary products and whatnot before they became free in Scotland. I say free, nine's free, but you get what I mean. You can get really cheap ones for like 12p in Tesco's. You mean to tell me that people couldn't afford that? Or you could just do what people used to do back in the day if they couldn't even afford a 12p packet. Just use a bit of tissue paper or whatever. Oh, stigma attached to apparently. Oh, well, thank God for Mama Sturgeon to come in and save the fucking day to eradicate said stigma. What? It's like she just makes up nonsense in order to make herself look as if she's bold and brave, standing firm on the world stage. You're a fucking Mongo.
Reform of the law on domestic abuse, the doubling of early years education and childcare, and the new child payment. Tangible examples of policies that are making the lives of women and girls better. So we should celebrate progress made, but we mustn't let it mask the deep inequalities that still exist across society or distract us from the work still to do. Better representation is not yet equal representation, not here in Parliament or across our council chambers.
So when we get to 50-50 representation, that will somehow mean that Parliament's now rife with equality, yeah? But as I said, you have to listen to the rhetoric. She's not saying it, but I've heard it a few other times, and it's written within the one of the misogyny reports that I was on about earlier that will be in my video that I'll make at some point. At least 50%. So it could be 60%, it could be 65% women, and that would be fine. But because it's under 50, that's unacceptable. And again, I don't understand how, obviously on paper, it might not appear equal, but just because it's 50-50, male and female, that does not somehow immediately imply or indicate equality within Scottish politics. Not at all. Especially when they all think the same way, because we're all fucking feminists.
Not on company boards or decision-making bodies the length and breadth of the country. Women still bear the biggest responsibility for childcare and unpaid care more generally.
I just realised, have I been the entire time, what an absolute waffler I am, I didn't even realise I hadn't shared my screen. I have been fucking talking the entire time without my screen being shared. Oh, that's fucking bad, like, shit. Wow. Oh, no. Oh, after all the things I went through earlier on to it. Oh, that's bad. Somebody could have fucking told me in the chat, like. Wow. What a pure bar, man. Fucking Jesus Christ. Well, I'm not going to go over it again, but I'll just, fucking wow. I'll just post in the chat for anybody that wants to go through it themselves. One Mongo! Fucking Jesus. No, it's not acceptable. Like, Jesus Christ. Ah. Wow. What a tit. What a fucking. Whatever, man. Right. Anyway. Oh, well, you can all look at Nicola Finland's bowl cut now, eh? Yeah. Bit of cream. But definitely a bit of dry gel. Wet look gel.
Women are still much more likely to work in occupations that are underpaid and undervalued. And of course, the lives of women are still blighted each and every day by an epidemic of harassment, abuse, threats, and violence. An epidemic that seems to be getting worse. No.
Isn't that funny that the more feminists end up in Parliament, all of a sudden the problems they proclaim pester society are all getting worse? Could it be potentially that they are not only bullshitting, over dramatizing things, but above all else, redefining words? I'd like for them to explain and fucking hell. I'd like for them to explain and define what they mean by harassment and abuse and misogyny, even. You know, it's very easy to use these words as if we're all supposed to accept them and take it at face value, but I beg to differ. I'm sorry. I just don't buy it. I don't fucking buy the nonsense that these people are espousing. You know? Especially in the context of implying it's an epidemic. Okay.
Better. That problem is real and it is very current. But the misogyny that motivates it is age-old. That's why I want to focus the remainder of my remarks today on two issues, one deeply historic and one contemporary, but linked by that common thread of misogyny. Before this Parliament right now is a petition demanding a pardon for the more than 4,000 people in Scotland, the vast majority of them women, accused and in many cases convicted and executed for being witches under the Witchcraft Act of 1563. Those who met this fate were not witches, they were people, and they were overwhelmingly women. At a time when women were not even allowed to speak.
Overwhelmingly women, so not all women. Again, destroys the narrative. But okay. On you go, Thin Lips. On you go. Sure, these people will be so thankful. Oh, wait, they can't. They're fucking dead. you know, it was embarrassing enough when she apologised on behalf of gays a couple of years ago. Now she's out apologising to the witches of the past. I mean, what's next? What the fuck's next?
Speak as witnesses in a courtroom. They were accused and killed because they were poor, different, vulnerable, or in many cases, just because they were women. It was injustice on a colossal scale, driven at...
Look at this. Wait a minute. I always notice this, and I can't figure out if it's, one of those classic examples of duping delight, or if this is a nervous laugh, which I highly doubt is a nervous laugh. But it's
in a courtroom.
It's like she always does this. Wait till you see it. It's about 6:44 seconds in.
Because they were women. It was injustice.
Always just bursts out into a little giggle, a smirk for no fucking reason. What's so funny like?
On a colossal scale, driven at least in part by misogyny in its most literal sense, hatred of women. The pardon the petition calls for...
It's most literal? No, you mean, yes, that's the definition of misogyny. Or the old definition, I should say. Okay. I don't see how that bears any relevance to the modern day, but, oh, wait for it. It's coming, because she manages to somehow link that to the modern day.
Would require this Parliament to legislate, and in future this Parliament may choose to do so. But in the meantime, the petition also calls for an apology. After all, these accusations and executions were instigated and perpetrated by the state. And so today, on International Women's Day, as First Minister on behalf of the Scottish Government, I am choosing to acknowledge that egregious historic injustice and extend a formal posthumous apology to all those accused, convicted, vilified or executed under the Witchcraft Act 1563. Now, some will ask why this generation should say sorry for something that happened centuries ago. It might actually be more pertinent to ask why it has taken so long. But for me, there are three reasons. Firstly, acknowledging injustice, no matter how historic, is important. This Parliament has issued, rightly so, formal apologies and pardons for the more recent historic injustices suffered by gay men and by minors. We're currently considering a request for a formal apology to women whose children were forcibly adopted. Reckoning with historic injustice is a vital part of building a better country. So too is recognising and writing into history what has been for too long erased, the experiences and the achievements of women. Second, for some, this is not yet historic. There are parts of our world where even today, women and girls face persecution and sometimes death because they have been accused of witchcraft. And thirdly, fundamentally, while here in Scotland, the Witchcraft Act may have been consigned to history a long time ago, the deep misogyny that motivated it has not. We live with that still. Today, it expresses itself not in claims of witchcraft, but in everyday harassment, online rape threats, and sexual violence. All of it intensified by an increasingly polarised and toxic public discourse and amplified each and every day by social media. It is no wonder that more women than ever before, certainly in my life,
doesn't take into consideration into the fact that a large proportion of the abuse, the alleged abuse that female politicians or aspiring politicians face on social media comes from other women. Can't talk about that though, of course. No, of course not. Not to mention, they love to pretend or portray this idea that it's only women that face abuse online. But last time I recall seeing, it was like a table that was done. I can't remember which newspaper. It might even have been The Guardian of all places, but it was a table of like the top 10 politicians in the UK that received the most abuse on Twitter and that. And the top 2 or 3 people on the table were men from the Tory party. Kind of destroys the little narrative they've got going. You know, it just never ends. Never ends.
Time are now questioning whether politics and public life are safe environments for women. And it is no wonder so many still feel scared to walk the streets. In recent days, we have marked the anniversary of the horrific murder of Sarah Everard. Her death sparked outrage and a demand for change. And yet in the year since Sarah was killed, dozens more women have been murdered across Britain.
How many men have been murdered? I don't know the statistic to that, but again, the automatic assumption is, or implication here, is that every woman, including Sarah Everard, were murdered specifically and solely because they were women by men who did so because they hate women. Femicide, essentially. You know, I'd say it's probably got more to do with sexuality in some instances. You know, if the guy that killed Sarah Everard was a gay boy, he probably would have gone out hunting that night for a guy. I'm just putting it out there. Maybe I could be wrong, but you know, I think that's kind of how it goes. But to assume that he did what he did because he hates women, I'm not a guy. I don't know what the fuck went through his head, what goes through these individuals' heads, but to automatically assume and imply that it's outdated stereotypes and rampant misogyny and a notion that women are subordinate is what leads men to kill. No, don't think so. But again, any excuse to push their feminist shit.
Just last week, I chaired the Cabinet's annual meeting with the Scottish Children's Parliament and the Scottish Youth Parliament. One of the trustees of the Youth Parliament, Sophie Reid, gave a powerful presentation about the experiences of young women today. She spoke of the ways in which women are forced to adapt their own behaviours and restrict their own lives to protect themselves as far as possible from the harassment, abuse and violence of men.
They make it sound as if they can't go from A to B without a torrent of abuse headed their way, like fucking torpedoes, you know? And this is hardly some groundbreaking analysis or groundbreaking information that she's relaying to us here. Somebody from the Children's Parliament, and let that sink in, we have a Children's Parliament here, basically has summarised what Phillips is summarising here, implying that women can't go from A to B without being abused or in fear of being abused, etc., etc. So somebody from the Children's Parliament said that they've changed their life and how they operate in order to avoid said abuse. So it's hardly any different. It's hardly groundbreaking. And I hate to be the bearer of bad news here. It's somewhat anecdotal, of course. I can't say, of course, because misogyny's rampant.
Experiences are heartbreaking, but they are not new. These are also the experiences of my generation and my mothers and my grandmothers. If they are not to become the experiences of the next...
Well, it's funny because I've spoken to my mother in the past. I've even spoken to my grandmother in the past. And several other females in my family from other generations. Older than me, obviously. And they all think that she's off her head and talking shite. So, it's very strange.
Generation 2, a line in the sand must be drawn. It is no longer acceptable to expect women and girls to adapt and accommodate. It is time to challenge unacceptable male behaviour and better protect women from it.
And again, male behaviour. There's some men in society that are oddballs, wired up wrong, and don't act like the rest of us. But the assumption or the implication here is that if we go into schools and we educate little boys, they will grow up to be perfect individuals, perfect little citizens of Scotland. You know, the reality of the matter is, let's just hypothesize here and say there's a potential rapist in waiting in a classroom. Sitting down and lecturing the classroom about how to treat women, how to approach women, how to appreciate women, etc., etc., you're just preaching to the choir. It is not going to change the mindset of the potential rapist in the corner because he's got a fucking screw loose. It would only change the mindset of the rapist in the corner if what she was saying is correct. And that is that he's only a potential rapist because of misogyny and outdated stereotypes. It's just cancer. It's absolute cancer. So essentially what she's saying here, what they're always saying, is that if we implement feminist policies, we will stop in its tracks, rape, domestic abuse, and murder. It's just bullshit.
We must change for good the culture of misogyny that has normalised such behaviour for far too long. And it is, of course, in this context.
Normalised behaviour. I mean, even things as mundane as catcalling. I mean, some women actually still like the term, like being catcalled. Not that I've ever done it myself, but I know women don't mind it, right? Some women don't, some women do. It's kind of a matter of choice. But I mean, that's kind of probably the least serious out of all of the things that we're talking about here. But as you go up the chart, the table, the more serious it gets. You know, harassment, whatever it may be, sexual harassment or sexual assault in terms of touching, whatever it may be, unwanted advances, etc., etc. Most men don't do that. Most men don't operate that way. Most men don't behave that way. Some do, whether it's because they got a screw loose or whether it's because they've had too much to drink. Not that it excuses it. It's not like they get pissed. I'll say this much for them, though. It's not like they get pissed and then all of a sudden they go, fucking women, they should be in the kitchen and start acting the way that they do. They're just pissed. I'm not saying that excuses it. But it's just nonsense. Again, it's like preaching to the choir, eh? It's just ludicrous.
That Baroness Helena Kennedy's working group on misogyny has this morning published its groundbreaking report. I thank Baroness Kennedy and the working group, including, of course, the late and sadly missed Emma Rich, for producing such a powerful and compelling report. Its recommendations are bold and they are far-reaching. It proposes a new Misogyny and Criminal Justice Act, and it recommends that this act includes a statutory misogyny aggravation. Now, it is important to stress, Presiding Officer, in anticipation of concerns about freedom of thought and speech, that this would not criminalise misogyny per se, but it would allow crimes, assault, for example, which are motivated by misogyny, to be treated more seriously in sentencing. Importantly, it would not apply to crimes such as rape, which are inherently misogynistic. The report also recommends 3 new criminal offences to reflect and better address the daily lived experience of too many women. These would be stirring up hatred against women and girls, public misogynistic harassment, and issuing threats of or invoking
public misogynistic harassment. So again, street harassment is now being branded misogynistic, whatever.
Rape or sexual assault or disfigurement of women and girls, whether online or offline. Presiding Officer, the Scottish Government welcomes these recommendations in principle. We will now, of course, give full consideration to the detail and we will respond formally as soon as possible. However, this report, in my view, matters beyond the detail of the specific recommendations it makes. It matters because it acknowledges and it gives powerful voice to the stark realities of everyday life for women. It recognises that misogyny is endemic and that it blights the lives of women every single day.
Oh dear. Just because a report has come out that verifies and reaffirms the worldview of Nicola Finlimps does not mean that the report is in any shape or form truthful. I mean, that is just as ludicrous as constantly referring to reports from the United Nations and their lackeys when it comes to climate change. Oh, the UN have said this, the UN have said that. They're always referring back to reports. Just because a report came out doesn't fucking mean anything. And as I said, I read through the vast majority of that misogynistic report today, hence the video that I intend to make at some point. And it's just waffle. It's just waffle. Again, just that there. Everyday life. It's an everyday occurrence for women. They're so hard done by here in Scotland. It's a fucking joke, like.
And it rightly points out that not all men are misogynist, but all women do experience misogyny.
Oh, yeah. Apart from the women that don't, though, you know. Apart from the women that don't experience it. But,
It also recognises the power of the law to drive social and cultural change and concedes that for women and girls, our law is currently failing. And perhaps most importantly of all, it articulates a fundamental truth that On this International Women's Day, we must all reflect on a society in which women do not feel safe is not one in which we can ever be truly equal. Presiding Officer, on International Women's Day, let us in this Parliament rededicate ourselves to building a society in which women and girls are safe and in which they feel safe. Let us acknowledge and reckon with historic injustice. And in doing so, let us redouble our work now to consign age-old misogyny to the history books once and for all. And let that then be the foundation on which we build...
Micro-misogyny. No, fucking God, no. I'll tell you, if they do that, I'm jumping on a dinghy and I'm going away to Somalia to join up with my comrades. I can't cope with as shit as it is. Micro-misogyny. Oh, God. But, how are we supposed to move towards a society where women feel safe when the narrative being presented is that women can't go from A to B without rampant abuse, harassment, etc., on a daily basis? It's the scourge of their life. It's just, I don't know.
Build a truly gender equal Scotland and offer it as an example to women and girls across the...
Nothing screams out gender equality than implementing misogyny as a standalone offence in a hate crime bill, but not including misandry. That's really equality.
Presiding Officer, on this International Women's Day, at a time of real darkness for our world, let us today send a message of hope and light to women and girls everywhere. I move the motion in my name.
Oh, God, so fucking cringe. I'm conscious of time, obviously. Bonnie Lad stream's on round about now. So it's my own fault for falling asleep earlier on. But there's a few other ones that I wanted to play. I mean, I probably could just go through the bits that I want to go through and then just catch up with the stream later. But I realise I'll probably be talking to myself. The majority of people will bug it off, which I don't blame them. But, Maggie Chapman. I had to include Maggie Chapman. I don't know where the fuck they got this Gollum lookalike from, but every single time she gets involved in one of these so-called debates in Parliament, she really goes out of her way to create a speech that's completely different to the rest, all this over-dramatic bullshit, such as this. Wait till you hear what she starts going on about here. It's fucking,
Of fear as a way to ensure obedience. In our society, we make much of love and say little about fear. Yet we are all terribly afraid most of the time. As a culture, we are obsessed with the notion of safety, yet we do not question why we live in states of extreme anxiety and dread. Fear is the primary force upholding structures of domination. It promotes the desire for separation, the desire not to be known. When we are taught that safety lies always with sameness, then difference of any kind will appear as a threat. When we choose to love, we choose to move against fear, against alienation and separation. The choice to love is a choice to connect, to find ourselves in the other.
What the fuck's she talking about?
These are the words of Gloria Jean Watkins, better known to us by her pen name, Bell Hooks, who sadly died in December last year. Bell Hooks' fine words provide an important reminder for us how the structures that we live within are used to constrain, oppress, and dominate.
Today, there it is, the structures of a brain. Oh, fucking hell. I just don't even know what to say. Just total waffle.
On this International Women's Day, and today perhaps more so than ever, I'd like to associate myself with the comments of the First Minister and many others about standing in solidarity, love, and peace with the women and girls in Ukraine, and those who have already fled their country. Solidarity, love, and peace, too, with the women and girls in Belarus, in Russia, and elsewhere who have and continue to stand up to oppressive regimes and institutionalized violence. Because
something that they do throughout the entirety of this is they all refer to the women and girls in Ukraine fleeing for their lives, they're in peril, but they're brave at the same time because they're fleeing, etc., etc. But none of them reference the men. And it's my understanding that the men ain't allowed to leave. You know, they're being told they have to fight. Unless that's propaganda, it's impossible to know at this point what the fuck's true and what's not. But, you know, just they never get a mention. And what about the men in Belarus and all the men in Russia that will be protesting alongside the women? Or do they not get a mention? It's just ridiculous. This constant obsession with praising and showing solidarity with solely women and girls, and not the men and the boys.
War is an extreme form of the domination and oppression that society's patriarchal system relies upon.
What the fuck, man? Oh, Jesus Christ. Wait, where are we? I need to know what moment we're on. Time. I have to play that back. 13:52. Wait a minute.
Who have and continue to stand up to oppressive regimes and institutionalized violence. Because war is an extreme form of the domination and oppression that society's patriarchal system relies upon and sustains. International Women's Day was, at its inception, 111 years ago, International Working Women's Day, a socialist holiday established by the Socialist International. It is now recognized by the United Nations and celebrated around the world, in some countries as a holiday, to mark women's contributions to society. Because women have, do, and will continue to contribute to every aspect of our society and our lives. Others have already spoken very eloquently about many of these different types of contributions made daily by women. Today, outside this building, women have come together for a climate vigil and rally.
Oh, yeah, this bit here. I mean, fuck off. Wait to hear this.
Gather together because women bear the brunt of the weight of the world's climate inaction.
Yeah. The climate crisis, quote unquote, that's a feminist issue. You know, women bear the brunt of inaction, apparently. And even if that was the case in other parts of the world, it's not the case here. But this is what they do, and not just in the context of climate change or lack thereof, and especially in the man-made capacity. They'll bring up, you know, gender-based violence, quote unquote, or genuine violence against women, or women that are oppressed in other parts of the world. They'll bring up all this shit and somehow manage to tie that into Scotland, as if it's some attempt to justify their existence as feminists in the modern day. They're feminists in Scotland because women in other parts of the world are forced to wear fucking burqas, for example. It's just ridiculous. Oh, women most affected by the climate change. Oh, get a grip.
Incidentally, as I was talking to some of the women at lunchtime, 2 men yelled from their vehicle, "Get back in the kitchen."
Oh, that really happened. How convenient, you know, because the notion that they're all trying to perpetuate throughout the entirety of this, one after the other, is this idea that outdated stereotypes are rife within society, and some of these outdated stereotypes consist of the idea that women should not be in the workplace, should not be in the parliament. They definitely should be in the fucking parliament, by the way. That's a no-brainer. But they should actually be in the kitchen. And it just so happens that Maggie short-haired Chapman was standing outside with a couple of women at some so-called climate vigil to talk about how depressed they are due to the burning planet. And some guy drove past and reaffirmed her worldview by saying exactly the sort of thing that Maggie Chapman desperately required in order for her to then repeat it in her script. You expect me to believe that? Pull the fucking other one. Like, what the fuck? Like, it's pathetic. These are overpaid non-entities talking utter shit. You know, and as I say, I've had to skip so much of the pish that these people start talking about purely because I'm conscious of the time. But every single one of them, apart from this guy who can't understand a damn thing he says, where's he gone? The Bane guy. I mean, honestly, they just talk pish, you know. But as I said, littered in and around their shit is references to policies that are in the pipeline, and that's why it's always interesting to keep an eye on this, as difficult as it is to consume.
But part of this vigil marks women who have been murdered for their community activism. Blanca Jeanette Cawas Fernandez, killed.
And again, none of these people that she's about to refer to here were murdered in Scotland, as far as I'm aware. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure that these people she claims were murdered for their climate activism probably took place in other parts of the world where gender equality is a thing to be desired for, to put it politely. But again, referring to things that happen in other parts of the world to justify their existence today in Scotland.
For protecting the land her community relied upon. Margarita Murillo, murdered for protecting lands and rivers. Fikile Changase,
Oh, I remember this one. This was in Govan Hill,
for protesting against coal mining, destroying her community's environment. Maria Enriqueta Matute,
this one was in Dundee.
Killed for campaigning against logging and mining, and so many more. Today we remember them all, and we acknowledge all of those whose names we do not know. This year, we focus on the theme of break the bias, because bias, conscious and unconscious, is deeply rooted in our patriarchal society. It is systemic and deeply ingrained in each and every single one of us. How many of us choose?
Jesus Christ. I genuinely do feel like a torture victim when I put myself through this shit. What is she fucking waffling on about?
Choose to surround ourselves with people just like us? How many of us judge others negatively because we've heard something unpleasant about them? How many of us value the opinion of someone more because of their age or skin color? How many of us ignore something a woman says only to acknowledge it when it is repeated by a man?
Oh, fuck. Here's another classic example of what feminists do, that I've noticed anyway, especially in this parliament. They will bring up supposed stereotypes or the sort of things that they'll all go to. You know, you'll hear the proverbial, I can't walk to the shop without being catcalled 24/7, etc., etc. The same way as I've said before, BAMEs will always refer to going into a shop. Every single one of them, they can't go into a shop without being followed by a guard. Now, I do not believe that happens to every single BAME that walks into a shop. Maybe if they're dressed as if they're ghetto, like they might get followed about. But they all say it in the same way that feminists always say that they can't go from A to B without being catcalled, etc. But that's another example of that, where they will say things along the lines of, a woman will say something she's not taken seriously, but then a man will repeat it and then it's taken seriously. I mean, that does not fucking happen all the time. But so why bring it up?
All of us must confront our biases. This requires active thought to challenge and break down. And we must recognize how one bias can be compounded by another. Intersections of difference make for a very complex landscape of oppressions and inequalities.
Oppressions and inequalities. These people genuinely do not know they're living. But the problem is that they are then advocating or debating or deciding or, contemplating on policies and proposals, etc., in order to eradicate the said oppression that they proclaim exists. What fucking oppression? What oppression are they talking about? This is just total nonsense. Absolute nonsense. But the issue here that I have especially is that this is going totally unchallenged. They're elected representatives. They're supposed to represent their constituencies, etc., etc. But yet, then instead of that, they're standing in Parliament talking nonsense. Absolute nonsense. And I stand by what I said at the start of the stream. This is one of the worst, if not the worst, video I have ever seen to come out of the Scottish Parliament's YouTube channel. Purely for the absolute bollocks that they all take turns spouting off. And this is no different. This absolute green bellend talking about oppression and biases, etc. What are you talking about, you specky dick? I mean, for fuck's sake, I can make a little joke out of it. I can make a joke out of her appearance because, well, that's not difficult. But the reality of the matter is, this is going unchallenged. It's fucking nonsense.
I thank Engender in particular for the detailed briefing they sent for today's debate. And in it, they so clearly outline the overlapping intersections that compound the inequalities so many women in Scotland and around the world experience on a daily basis.
Oh, a daily basis. And again, she includes around the world alongside Scotland. I'm fucking wow.
We women know the consequence of these biases. We women live the consequences of these biases every day.
Oh, every day. Oh my God.
We women die because of the consequences of these biases.
What are you talking about? Oh, yeah, femicide, my mistake. Yeah.
And it is not for us women to address these biases alone. Everyone in this chamber, in every workplace, in every community, in every home across Scotland has a responsibility to act, to change, to challenge themselves and others to be better. Because there remains a wide chasm between the aspirations we've heard for decades about the eradication of biases that women face and the reality that affects women and girls around the world. I thank the First Minister and others for acknowledging the work and recommendations of the Misogyny and Criminal Justice Working Group. We must now act. We need real gender mainstreaming. We need genuine engagement with and realisation of the rights held within the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, as well as engagement with and realisation of the rights of other minority groups. Equality is for everyone. So on this day next year, I hope we can all be here to say that we are much further along in our struggle for a different kind of culture, one where we have broken the bias.
Thank you, Ms Chapman, and now Colin Palmer.
Aye, fuck off. I wouldn't take a sandwich, James Duncan. I wouldn't take a sandwich off Maggie Chapman. Like, no way. No way. Who else will I include? I mean, already it's part. I'm actually surprised that there's still people watching. I thought they would all be watching Bonnie live stream, or maybe it's not started yet. But just because there is still people watching. Oh, Kebab Stewart. Yeah, this one was a belter as well. The whole thing's a belter, really, in terms of laughs. I mean, you can make fun, poke fun at these people and the absolute nonsense that they're talking, but the reality, as I said, there's malevolent undertones. There's no pushback. It's going unchallenged, and their worldview is being taken as gospel fact and truth, and it's not. It's total fucking nonsense. But this boot, do you know what? I absolutely despise this boot, and it's not because she's BAME. I mean, that pisses me off because she does nothing but remind us she's BAME all the time. But one of the things that pisses me off the most about her is because I made a video about 2 or 3 months ago, and she was on a panel with a few other BAMEs, and they were talking about what more needs to be done in Scottish society in order to, you know, achieve equality and eradicate the racisms and all that bullshit, right? And one of the first things that she says is she wants to be seen for who she is and not seen as a BAME. Yet every single fucking time I have seen her since, and prior, by the way, standing at podiums, she does nothing but remind us that she's BAME. If you want to be seen as an individual and not seen as a BAME, shut the fuck up about the fact you're BAME. It's pretty simplistic. You know, there's my sound advice for the night before I really start to get pissed off, because she really pisses me off. She's one of the few politicians in that parliament, puppets in that parliament, that really rubs me up the wrong way purely because of the total hypocrisy of her. Talking one hand, I want to be seen for who I am, and then the next breath reminding us all the time that she's BAME, while also advocating for more BAMEs and talking to no end about intersectionality and all the rest of that shit. BAMEs get into positions of power in Scotland and do nothing but talk about BAMEs. By that logic, then, there should be at least one person in that parliament to represent me, people like me, and speak on behalf of us. But there's not. And the argument will be, oh, but the parliament's majority white. Yeah, it might very well be, but they're a bunch of fucking wet wipes. And none of them represent the everyday man in Scotland. They represent progressives. They represent commies, socialists, Marxists, etc. They don't represent us. Anyway.
Colleagues, as we celebrate the journeys and achievements of women all over the world on this day. This time last year, of course, there were no women of colour in this chamber, and today we have 2, and I thank my colleagues for bringing that to everyone's attention as if nobody had noticed. However, not to diminish our own success, I'm just going to say it again, in 2022, we have 2. So
we have 2. Say it as if that's not good enough. We're supposed to live in a hypothetical meritocracy here. Therefore, the best person for the job gets the job, the best person gets voted in, etc., etc. You're not supposed to get voted in purely because you're BAME. Second of all, again, as I said earlier on, in 2001, census, 98% white. 2011, 96% white. So now, I don't know what the next census will showcase, probably about 90%. I'd argue maybe 87, whatever, right? Let's just say it's for argument's sake, 8%, 9% is now non-white. That's still quite a small proportion of the population. And out of that proportion, or that percentage, how many are politically minded? How many are in positions to get elected, etc.? It's fucking ludicrous, man. It's just this assumption that more should have been done. There should have been more BAME women in here a long time ago. Totally disregarding the population percentages, demography-wise, but nah.
Let that sink in.
Oh, it's sunk in.
Whilst we have certainly seen progress, and in this Scottish Parliament has more MSP women than previous ones, we share a collective responsibility to continue that trajectory towards equal representation for women and to break that bias. Whilst we've seen progress in recent decades, we've also witnessed sobering reminders that we for equality is far from over, the fight for equality. The fact remains that whether we are competing in the labour market, caring for loved ones, or simply walking home, women face obstacles, women face discrimination, and women face dangers that men do not. We know that the pandemic has highlighted existing inequalities between men and women. Furthermore, the research from Close the Gap last year stated that Black and minority ethnic women face a combination of gendered and racial barriers that affect their ability to enter, to progress, and to stay in good quality employment. According to Close the Gap's research, over 50% of workers in roles that were assessed by the Scottish Government as being at high risk jobs of being disrupted were women. Whilst BAME women, particularly young BAME women, were more likely to experience loss of hours, loss of earnings, and almost 3/4 reporting that they had experienced racism, discrimination, racial prejudice, and or bias in the workplace.
Again, we're expected to take that as if that's automatically truthful just because it's been reported, just because it's been espoused. It's anecdotal at best. But again, I'd like for them to define what they mean by that, what they mean by racism, etc. Because as we all know, in this day and age, these words have been completely redefined to mean whatever the fuck they want them to mean. So just saying that as if it's a matter of fact, don't buy it. Sorry, I don't buy it.
It's important to understand and recognise the intersectionality of race and gender inequalities. Women face institutional and other prejudices, but it is clear that the experience of women of colour is even tougher than that, with the additional layers. We talk about the glass ceilings, but we should also talk about the glass walls, and we should also talk about the glass floors.
Yeah, very, very uneventful. Really pushing the boat out there with that analogy, eh? Doesn't even make fucking sense. A glass floor, whatever. But again, referring to intersectionality. Fuck, this is QCAB Stewart's. Wait, sorry, Scott Sarmo. When's Bonnie Lad stream on? Am I running alongside that? Or is it on at 9? For anybody in the chat, can you remind me? Like, because I'm using my phone to look at the chat. Like, but I know bother, Scott Sarmo.
One notable example can be found in education. In 2019, the NUS reported that over 80% of...
Oh, here we go. Yeah. This is what I wanted to put on Kebab Stewart's. Fucking boot. I'm sick of this rhetoric. Like, I need to hear this.
The glass walls, and we should also talk about the glass floors. One notable example can be found in education. In 2019, the NUS reported that over 80% of white UK university students domiciled in the UK received a first or upper second class degree, compared to 70% of Black, Asian and minority ethnic students. When asked about the possible contributing factors to this, students frequently cited the lack of role models and diversity amongst senior staff in education at their institutions.
Oh, how convenient. So the one thing that they cite more than the rest to justify their shortcomings is the one thing that QCAB Stuart in particular advocates for on a daily basis, or anti-racists in general advocate for on a daily basis. And that is, of course, that we need more BAMEs in the teaching workforce. We need more BAME professors, more BAME head teachers, etc., etc. And until such a time as we see this, inequality is quite clearly rampant. And on top of that, they don't see themselves. The teachers are all white, or mainly white. So the BAMEs don't see themselves. That in-group preference that they're referring to, the very same thing that we're told is a social construct. But on top of that, though, by that fucking logic then, every white child, every white adolescent in Scotland, every white student should perform a hell of a lot better if their teacher or the professor, whatever it may be, is white. That's not how it works, as far as I'm aware anyway. It kind of goes purely on the basis of whether or not you like your professor, you like your teacher. It's got fuck all to do with whether or not he's of the same racial kin. But apparently, the BAMEs don't see it that way. Very strange. But again, subtle hints pushing for getting more BAMEs into the profession of teaching, as if that will somehow change things for the BAMEs. It's just... And on top of that, actually, may I just add that if we're expected to believe that BAMEs will perform better if we see more BAME professors or more BAME teachers, would that not then mean, on the flip side, that whites will perform less better? If we're expected to believe that BAMEs walk into a classroom and for the entirety of that school year and whatnot, they don't do as well because the teacher's white. If we replace that white teacher with a BAME, does that mean then that the BAMEs will perform better, but the white pupils will not perform so well?
Same year, the writer and activist Nicola Rollock interviewed 20 out of the UK's total 25 Black female professors, a pitifully low number in itself, which represents actually...
Well, it's 25 fucking more than would exist if there was anything actually holding these people back. So get it up, you.
0.1% of all the professors in the UK. White men comprise 68% of all UK professors.
And it's said as if that's a bad thing or as if that's an outrage. We should be outraged by that. Are they? I mean, I know that we're moving into an age where this will no longer be a white-dominated society in terms of demography, right? But they always point to white-dominated spaces, such in this instance, white professors making up, or white males making up 68% of professors across the UK. And it's said as if that's shocking, as if that's outrageous, etc. You know, that's the underlying implications that I'm getting from this boot. I mean, are they forgetting? No, they're not forgetting, but they kind of masquerade their distaste, their resentment, under the guise of simply pointing out disparities and shocking facts and hot takes and whatnot. But the reality of the matter is they're complaining because a white majority society has institutions that have white majorities within said institutions, and they're fucking complaining about that. That's what this is. But it's camouflage, it's masqueraded as simply pointing out inequalities, you know? Sprinkle your rainbow dust, but it doesn't change them.
In these interviews, she had repeated descriptions of a culture of bullying, racial stereotyping, and microaggressions within higher education.
And ironically referring to microaggressions.
Sadly, we are even seeing a disparity in the treatment of Ukrainian women of colour, as they are also women who are running for refuge.
Ukrainian women of colour. Yeah, that's another oxymoron if ever I heard one. Ukrainian women of colour. You know, to my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the bulk of the BAMEs that we've been seeing coming over with the Ukrainian women and girls and the trains and whatnot, initially we were told they were students that were over there studying, but they've somehow decided that due to what's happening in the country at present, they're just going to jump on the refugee bandwagon. No, I'm sorry, if you're a student, you fuck off home. You don't decide to go and apply for refugee status somewhere. Yeah, I was on the phone to Scott's Armour earlier on the day, and I made the comparison that it's the equivalent of when you were a kid and you were having a sleepover at your pal's house, but a big massive argument took place in the house, and as a result, your friend who you were staying over at, he's decided that he's going to go and stay with his grandparents for the evening to let things cool down. And instead of you deciding, oh well, that's my cue to go home, you decide, oh well, I'll just come here. It's the same thing.
Today, we renew our call for employers across all sectors, our schools, our colleges and universities, to be bolder, not to prop up ineffectual equality policies with tick-boxing exercises, but to implement that real change with measurable outcomes. We must also hold accountable within our own communities and amongst our friends, and not to be afraid of introspection on ourselves, appreciating that we are not always free from bias. On a national level, the Scottish Government has proven its commitment to eradicating both racial and gender inequality through extensive range of actions and proposals, including a new bill, which will incorporate 4 United Nations human rights treaties into Scots law, notably the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. This will help advance economic and social and cultural rights. Fair work and gender pay gap action plans will also assist Scotland in achieving its ambition to be a fair work nation.
Oh yeah. Implementing a bunch of United Nations charters into Scots law, superseding our own law and replacing it with United Nations laws. Laws that have been created purely to coerce or steer or guide countries into transforming into becoming so-called socialist utopias, or at least in principle. Oh God. So once the SNP have implemented these 4 charters from the United Nations, and they implement the United Nations Children's Rights Charter, that will be 5 United Nations charters that have been implemented into Scottish law. I don't think there's any other country in the world that can compare to how far gone Scotland is at this point. You know, I'm pretty sure that not one other country in the world has even implemented the UNCRC, the United Nations Children's Rights Charter. I could be wrong on that front, but I'm pretty sure Scotland would have been the first because they already voted unanimously to implement it. It's just not come as of yet into effect due to court proceedings and whatnot. But once it's implemented, we will be the first country, I think, I could be wrong, to have implemented that. And I don't know if any other country has implemented the other 4 charters in that she's referring to. And if I remember rightly, one of them is about disability rights, or, you know, human rights for disabled people. One's for gender, or women, I should say. One's for race equality, and the other one's for age. Age, like elderly people, probably elderly women. But why we need the United Nations own rules and laws and regulations implemented alongside our own is anybody's fucking guess. But hey, that's Rainbow Unicorn Land, and yet they've got the absolute audacity to still brag about the fact, or gloat about the fact, we live in a so-called democracy. I didn't vote for this, well, I don't vote in general, but I don't really think even any of the SNP brainlets that are promised independence every election cycle vote for any of this shit. They're implementing things without the public giving them the green light to do so. We live in an age now where these pricks do and say as they fucking please. I know that's gone on for the longest time, but it's becoming so much more apparent now in this day and age, especially in Scotland. These people get elected promising independence referendums. Gullible people vote them in, and instead of delivering on the referendum, which they're never going to get, they instead decide to go back to what they were doing prior, and that is implementing Agenda 21 or Agenda 2030 Sustainable Development Goal policies, and pandering and bootlicking to the United Nations on a daily basis. Remarkable.
We welcome every centimetre and metre a modern reference there instead of the inches and the miles, because they didn't work. But we know there is much more to do, and the road is long and winding and exhausting. But as we celebrate this International Women's Day, let us acknowledge the essential contributions of women, the importance of diversity, and recommit ourselves in solidarity to breaking that bias. I'd like to close with the words of one of my favourite poets, Maya Angelou, and this is dedicated to all the women from our past, our present, and the ones to come. Now you understand just why my head's not bowed. I don't shout or jump about or have to talk real loud. When you see me passing, it ought to make you proud, 'cause I'm a woman, phenomenal woman. That's me. Members, that is all of us today. Thank you.
Oh, fuck. Just making it all, yeah. Absolute waffle, man. I can't remember which ones in particular I wanted to play. Because obviously my initial plan before I fell asleep earlier on in the day was to just go through the entirety or the vast majority of this, but I'm not going to do that purely because I know Bonnie on streams on at some point. No idea if it started or not. But I think I'd look a bit of a dickhead if, you know, I actively started a stream up and coincided with his. But who else is there? I want to put on one of the white men. You need to see the absolute state of male politicians in this parliament. This guy. Yes, this one I'll do. I think it's this one, is it? On the beam, I forgot about her. Like, oh, I. But him, yes, he's a fucking Mongo. I mean, what the? The S&P of old, before like the S&P 79 group. I mean, you could have kind of got away with calling them nationalists back then, you know, in the 60s, the 50s, and whatnot. But not now. Not now, like.
And an opportunity to meet with various groups and discuss the work that they do. It was the first time that I met the force of nature called Agnes Tolmie, chair of the Scottish Women's Convention, a very inspiring and motivating woman. I'm sure I'll hear from her again. The message I took loud and clear from the event was that gender inequality makes our society poorer, not only in equality terms, but it impacts on our ability to grow our economy. Gender inequality is economic inequality. And like Cowcab Stewart, I'm going to take a quote from Maya Angelou, and it's from I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. And she says, "There is no greater agony than bringing an untold story inside you." Too many women in our society have that untold story inside them about what they want to tell, what they want to share, and what to highlight what they can do. Our job as parliamentarians is to break the bias and give equal opportunities to women. In Scotland, we're making progress, but much work needs to be done. In 2018, the full-time equivalent employment rate for women was 42%, 58% for men. 85% of people aged 16 to 64 who were inactive due to caring were women, the remaining 15% men. 8% of women in employment aged 16 plus were self-employed, compared to 16% of men. And the median hourly rates were £2 less for women than they were for men. The Scottish Women's Convention in their manifesto asked for elections last year looked at some key issues, and I want to touch on some of these, because I think it's important that we still remember these. On housing, an increase in funding for women to get access for funding costs, including the ability to be as flexible as possible around about Scottish Welfare Fund and discretionary.
He's fucking boring, but he starts talking about male behaviour, that's why I put him on.
Housing payments and ensuring safe accommodation for women that accounts for their own personal experiences is utmost priority. I've seen that when I met with Women's Aid in East Lothian. And in childcare, and this came through really strongly in the forum on Saturday, a commitment to high quality working conditions for staff within the childcare sector, including working benefits and adaptability and flexibility for childcare. Again, that came through very strongly. In social security, this is even more important than ever now, placing emphasis on the need for greater food security for many families living in poverty who have that choice now to either heat or to eat. And the commitment to universal strategies such as free school meals needs to continue, obviously. We need to ensure funding for advocacy organisations to ensure women are aware of the rights around the social security system, appeals process and other financial issues. On in health, Scotland's Women's Health Plan is obviously very welcome, but we need to encourage take-up and recruitment of community-linked workers in Drove, the Scottish Prescribing Network. This is key in increasing the use of community hubs in less popular areas where women can go to access information and support around about health. And on employability, we need commitment to work with businesses and trade unions to further promote the real living wage across all sectors, with designated return to work and retraining programmes that account for all age groups, including older women and digital skills abilities. Presiding officer, I secondly want to talk about what we men need to do more in tackling violence against women. We men aren't doing enough. We need to lead and drive change, not only in this place, but in society generally. We need to challenge misogyny every single time we hear it. We need to take women's safety concerns even more seriously. The only way to change that is changing men's behaviour. The only way. Next week, I'm hosting a roundtable inviting MSPs to discuss this issue within gender, Edinburgh Crisis, Scottish Women's Aid, Zero Tolerance, White Ribbon and others to discuss this issue. Today, more than 40 MSPs have accepted. Graham Golden, formerly of the Violence Reduction Unit in Glasgow, has called on us men to define violence in a way that would help us individually prevent it. And I've mentioned this in the Chamber previously, and I want to mention it again because it's really, really important. He said in a blog for Don't Be That Guy campaign, when I see the term violence, I look at it as more as an attitude, a behaviour.
There you go. So again, another example of them redefining words. So violence is not how it used to be defined. It's one of those words where I know what it means, obviously, but to actually put it into a definitive term on the spot. But yeah, we all know what violence means, but they're now redefining it to be as simplistic as a mere attitude. So now you can kind of get under, it gives you a bit of insight into how misleading all this shit is when they talk about violence, gender-based violence. They're talking about gender-based attitudes, yeah. But it sounds like they're trying to eradicate domestic abuse and murder, etc. when they go on about gender-based violence. But it's gender-based attitudes, you know. This is fucking when did violence mean an attitude problem?
Rather than a physical act. When we do this, we can start to address behaviours and attitudes that can, if unchallenged, lead to other acts of violence like murder, sexual assault and rape. When we don't focus on these behaviours, we remain silent about them, and here we give permission for abuse and violence to take place. Presiding officer, the struggle for women to achieve gender equality is one for every single one of us. As men, we've had that privilege far too long. And I'm going to close on a quote from an amazing woman, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and she said this: "For both men and women, the first step in getting power is to become visible to others, and then to put on an impressive show. As women achieve power, the barriers will fall. The society sees what women can do. As women can see what women can do, there will be more women out there doing things, and we'll all be better off for it. Presiding officer, let's all ensure we work together to achieve that goal for the women of Scotland and worldwide." Thank you.
What a fucking bellend. Yeah, talking about attitudes. And it's up to men to change their behaviour. Again, though, the vast majority of men do not act in the way that they're insinuating is a prevalent issue, or a prevalent issue amongst men. You know, outdated stereotypes, etc. Most men don't have that. Most men don't see women as subordinate. Most men don't fucking go out of their way to harass, stalk, abuse, whatever it may be, women. Most men ain't wired up wrong in terms of being potential rapists and or murderers. You know, so quite frankly, what attitudes and what behaviours we need to change is quite beyond me. But anyway, what else have we got? Oh, he's a bellend. Oh yeah, there's an intervention here. It's quite funny.
Women ending up dead to influencing the decision of other men in society, and calling out some of the most appalling acts that we still see. And that's one of the things that saddens me, because I think when we talk about women here in Scotland and around the world, progress on even establishing those most basic of rights is painfully slow. And as Maggie Chapman and Julian Martin herself pointed out, being a woman's a risky business that still results in many women ending up dead as a result of standing up just for the basic rights, and in some cases just for existing. And that is wrong, and it's a shame on the whole of our society.
So He attributes, again, referring to what Maggie Chapman was on about earlier on, women killed in other parts of the world for allegedly standing up for climate-related issues, and that's apparently something that should make us ashamed of our own society. What the fuck? The fuck? Scottish politics, folks.
And every time we discuss this subject, we hear countless examples of women pushed into a secondary role, women who are expected, as we've heard many times in this debate, expected to play simply a domestic role.
There it is again. This is what I was on about earlier with Maggie Chapman, referring to the proverbial stereotypical go-to examples that feminists will pull out of their arse when it comes to talking about, you know, the stereotypes and misogyny across society. That it will be things like, I can't go anywhere without being catcalled, or another one will be that women are all expected to stay in the kitchen. That's how men see them. You know? So he's referring to it now. What are you talking about? That's not a common theme. Women don't go from A to B and being and are told repeatedly, relentlessly, that they shouldn't be where they are. They should, in fact, be in the kitchen. There's an argument to be made, I guess, that that's where they should be. No offense, women, if there's any watching. But, you know, I'll tell you where they should be, at the Parliament. And I've just remembered, after this Bellin's spoken, there was one more in particular that I wanted to play. Wait till you hear it.
Or not seen you know, in the same way as men. And you know, that came home to me again during Michelle Thompson's opening contribution on the challenges women face during war, and again in my colleague Tess White's contribution today, because we all fall into the lazy habit, watching our television screen, of thinking it is men who are at the forefront and face the brunt of these conflicts. But you don't have to look very far or try very hard to see the harms inflicted on women, many of which remain with them far longer after conflict is finished. And sadly, you know, we take part in this debate today. These issues around war have moved closer to our shores geographically, but again, as Gillian Martin and others have pointed out, you know, these are not new issues. There are women around the world who face these issues continuously, and for many, there is no escape, and our words of solidarity alone are not enough. My colleague Pam Gosel spoke in the same members' debate last week and gave a much more personal account of some of the barriers she'd faced in getting into this place. And it's one of the things I admire about Pam, in particular about all the women in this Parliament, is that they're not wasting the opportunity to help others follow them. And I think there's no coincidence that with each new Parliament, we see new voices, and we have to work harder to make sure that everyone feels safe to participate in our politics. In the time I've got left today, I wanted to touch on something personal, and whilst I cannot speak as a woman, I didn't want to let this opportunity pass me by to highlight a couple of concerns that I've seen.
I can't that's debatable.
Myself. They might not fit in neatly with this year's theme, or indeed my party's amendment, but I think it is important they are heard, and I know that Natalie Dawn has already touched on one of them. I mentioned it previously during a debate on whole family support, and I have asked questions on it throughout the pandemic, but it's something that sits very uncomfortably with me, and that's the support for new and expectant mums during the worst of COVID. Through my own family experience, I've seen how tough this time has been, and it's something which has come through in my inbox as well. And too often, the rules and guidance which we in this chamber have sought to impose for public health reasons has left a group of women, yes, all parents and carers, but particularly women, to struggle without a support network, stranded in many cases from their family, without the access to the medical support they would have had in the past. And it seems at times, in trying to do something good, we've lost the balance between protecting physical and mental health. There are a group of women out there who got no face-to-face maternity classes, others who got no support at appointments or scans, and others who were left with a face mask on to give birth without anyone there to help and support them. We dodged these issues largely for the birth of what is our second child, but I'm painfully aware of the impact this has had and continues to have on others. Like with so many caring and other family and domestic responsibilities, the burden, both physical and emotional, throughout the pandemic has fallen disproportionately on women. And I remain concerned that we sometimes see these decisions as somehow being less important or just taking for granted that there will be no real pushback. And it's something we have to do better on in the future. I was going to touch on another issue, but I recognise I'm out of time.
Sorry,
and it's already been
he's just waffling shit. I'll say one thing though. I'm surprised that he made reference to the fact that he's straight.
Marion Gray, a mathematician who influenced the telecom giants of today, geologist Marion Gordon from Aberdeen, and I could go on, but of course time won't allow. The value that women, ordinary and extraordinary, have made to society is incalculable. But
just a heads up, I can't remember if it's this woman or a different woman, but the woman that I'm trying to find, what she says will probably piss off the remainder of the people that are still watching the stream, because it really fucking annoyed me when I heard it earlier on the day. I don't know if it might have been a different one I was watching, because there was another sort of miniature debate, quote unquote, that they had a few days prior, which I might have a gander for now, just in case it is on that. But which she says really, really just feminism in a nutshell.
Today, presiding officer, and despite progress that has been mentioned across the chamber, we know that women are bearing the brunt of gender inequality enormously. A helpful briefing from Engender tells us that the UN Women estimate that the impact of COVID-19 for women's equality could mean the loss of 25 years' worth of progress. And of course, Scotland isn't immune to that. Measures to respond to the pandemic have disproportionately affected women's access to paid work, especially younger women and women of colour, and the volume of care that women provide. Women disproportionately make up our army of unpaid carers. Women are disproportionately in low-paid jobs, and women still, despite the Scottish Government's innovative early years education policy, disproportionately manage childcare. Presiding officer, the Scottish Government has a proud record of promoting women's equality, and I'm delighted that today, on International Women's Day, Baroness Helena Kennedy QC's report on misogyny and criminal justice in Scotland has been published. This immense piece of work, including examining whether there are gaps in the law that should be addressed by specific criminal offence to tackle such behaviour. And I'm delighted that the Scottish Government will now consider its recommendations of creating a Misogyny Criminal Justice Scotland Act, containing a public misogynistic harassment offence, an offence of stirring up hatred against women and girls, an offence of issuing threats of or invoking rape or sexual assault or disfigurement of women and girls, and a new statutory aggravation of misogyny. And so today we fight on to banish the gender pay gap and to gain equal access to the boardroom. We fight on for an
equal access to the boardroom.
end to sexual harassment and bullying at work. We fight on for an end to the curse of violence against women with our Equality Safe strategy and £5 million of new funding to rape crisis centres and domestic abuse services to help cut waiting lists. We fight on for an end to the bias against LGBTI women, disabled women and women of colour. And we recognise the inhumane treatment of women who were forced to give up their babies just a few decades ago. So in conclusion, presiding officer, I'd like to celebrate all women, mums, grands, aunts, sisters, carers, women who are an inspiration to someone somewhere. And to the many amazing women who work in the third sector, who work tirelessly to protect and improve the lives of women. We should celebrate how far we've come, but know that there is much more to do so that our daughters and granddaughters are shown the respect and best possible future that they deserve. Then our work and that of our pioneering sisters will be done. Thank you.
Our sisters. And that wasn't her. It must be her. Surely it's her. My bad. I really should have. I can't for the life of me remember which woman it was.
Mark International Women's Day 2022. It's against the background of violence and conflict in Ukraine. We do so with particular sombre hearts. We know that women and girls are disproportionately impacted by war. One former UN peacekeeping commander believes it has become more dangerous to be a woman than a soldier in an armed conflict. Too often, women bear the humanitarian cost of war, but their acts of bravery, heroism, and kindness also demonstrate there's a humanity in adversity. Since Russia's unprovoked invasion almost 2 weeks ago, we've seen and heard harrowing accounts of how this appalling conflict has collided with the lives of the Ukrainian people. In just a matter of days, daily commutes to work, and the school gates have been replaced by desperate journeys in search of safety. 2 million people have been displaced as they flee the violence, mostly women and children. They've left everything behind. As fathers are called up to fight and families are separated, courageous mothers have walked dozens of kilometres with their frightened children in frigid winter temperatures, the threat of Russian attacks spurring them on into the unknown. For weary Ukrainian refugees crossing into Poland by train, Polish mothers left prams, buggies, blankets and baby bags on a station platform, a deeply moving gesture of solidarity and support. The bravery and resilience of women across Ukraine humbles us all. The female doctors who stayed behind in hospital basements to care for their pet patients as the sound of Russian shelling reverberated through the buildings. The resistance, the women making Molotov cocktails and taking up arms to defend their country's sovereignty from an irredentist dictatorship. The director of Save Wild Sanctuary, Natalia Popova, who stayed with a lorry evacuating animals to Poland as Russian...
Oh, shit. Oops, I didn't mean to do that.
Stirring up hatred against them.
My bad. I don't know if it's her.
Baby called Ivan as they fled the conflict. They were shot to death. Presiding officer, we cannot possibly know what it's like to walk in the shoes of women in Ukraine during this senseless violence. But to those women, and to those women in conflict zones around the world who are experiencing the aftermath of war, please know this: we are with you, shoulder to shoulder, arm in arm. Presiding officer, last week marked 1 year since 33-year-old Sarah Everard was kidnapped, raped and murdered by police officer Wayne Couzens, who pretended to arrest her as she walked home from a friend's house. He was a predator, hiding in plain sight, cloaked in pretense and deceit. The brutality of Sarah's death shook our country to its core. I and other MSPs were humbled to join the Sarah Everard Memorial protest in Edinburgh on Thursday last week. But as campaigner and founder of Strut Safe, Alex Chung, said during the protest, nothing has changed. In the year since Sarah was killed, 125 more women have reportedly lost their lives across the UK. In Scotland, the number of domestic abuse incidents has increased for the 5th year in a row. On average, 180 domestic abuse cases are reported to Police Scotland every single day. Dundee City, in my own region, has recorded the worst rates of domestic abuse in Scotland. 9 in 10 cases took place in the home, supposedly a place of sanctuary, but the least safe place for far too many women. The number...
And it's each and every single one of these cases that this woman is referring to, male or woman. Because again, they always try to imply that domestic violence, domestic abuse only ever occurs when women are the victims and men are the perpetrators. They completely obfuscate the truth, negate from reality. But that's here nor there. There's just, once I find this one last clip, I don't know which woman it is. It's either her or her, potentially. I'll probably finish up, but because I can't take any more of this shit. But it might be her.
The number of sexual crimes recorded across Scotland increased by 13% last year. The number of rapes increased by 12%. The majority of the correspondence I receive at the moment relates to women's safety. I know women want to be able to wear what they want without the threat of sexual harassment and violence. I know women are hoping for the day that they can walk home from a friend's house or a night out without clutching their keys in one hand and their mobile phone in the other. I know women the length and breadth of the country are asking, what will it take for the status quo to change? Presiding officer, the reality is that for change to take place, we must see a change in attitudes and belief systems. There was widespread outrage when footballer David Goodwillie, ruled to be a rapist in civil court proceedings, was signed by Wraith Rovers in January. The Wraith Rovers women's team cut ties to the club in opposition to the decision. Women's captain Taylor Attree stepped down, saying she wanted nothing to do with the signing. Public outrage was compounded by a disgracefully tin-eared statement from the club defending the decision, highlighting Goodwillie's footballing ability and emphasising that this was the community club's foremost consideration in taking him on. What kind of message does that send, not just to women and girls, but to men and boys? A poll by Ipsos and the Global Institute for Women's Leadership at King's College London, published last week, it revealed that almost 1 in 5 men across the UK do not believe that gender inequality really exists.
There's it, yeah. So I'll play it again, but just because I interjected there. But so she goes on to start talking about, well, you'll hear it there. But gender inequality, it doesn't exist in the context of what they're implying, because name me one right that women don't have. I know this is a hot take for myself, but it's the reality of the matter. The fact that you have to scrape the barrel and conjure up the most basic of points, and even the most basic of points completely shatter the shit they're trying to espouse. There is no such thing as gender inequality in Scotland, because women and men have equal rights. So essentially, the whole point of fucking feminism, the crusades of feminism, it's already achieved what it set out to achieve. But that wasn't good enough. So now we've decided to start redefining words and pointing to disparities. For example, amongst other things. So yes, gender inequality does not exist because despite the fact they redefine words, they redefine terms to suit their narrative, words have meaning, words have definitions that will not change for the rest of us. They may change for them. So gender inequality means, or used to mean, or still does mean to everybody else, it's fucking normal. A society, for example, where men have rights or have more rights than women, or gender or sex, have more rights, are treated better, etc., in comparison to the other. Men and women are treated equally in society in Scotland. Men and women have equal rights. But you could argue that women have more rights at this fucking point. But according to them, no, gender inequality is still rampant. Gender inequality, according to them, of course it exists. Yeah, that's because it doesn't mean anything in relation to what it initially meant.
Almost a third of men think that traditional masculinity is under threat. Almost a third again think feminism. Global Institute for Women's Leadership at King's College London published last week. It revealed that almost 1 in 5 men across the UK do not believe that gender inequality really exists. Almost a third of men think that traditional masculinity is under threat. Almost a third again.
And is it not? Is it not? No. Could have fooled me. Could have fooled me.
I think feminism does more harm than good.
And she says this as if that's an outrageous belief to have, that feminism does more harm than good. I could list a plethora of reasons for what harm feminism has caused across society, including a fucking very personal problem I'm having at present just now, where I have absolutely no legal rights in the legal system when it comes to my child. Yes, there you go, folks. People might not know that. There's a little revelation for you. I've got a wee boy, and I've got no fucking rights. I can't see him because I'm not in the birth certificate. And you could make an argument that's due to feminism. All the rights are in the mother's hands. But that's just one example of many. Another classic example is the fact that you can see right here on screen that there's a bunch of feminists making up total shit that then justifies fucking policy. Policy change, behavioural change, etc. Just seeping into every avenue of society, every orifice of society is this fucking cancer, and it's predicated on bollocks read off the scripts.
It is these regressive attitudes that need to change to break the bias.
Oh, it's regressive. Regressive attitudes, apparently. So if you don't conform to the feminist worldview, if you don't conform to the progressive worldview, then you are by default a regressive with a regressive worldview. That type of thinking is taboo. More needs to be done to ensure that you don't think that way, and nobody else thinks that way. I mean, it's not exactly an outlandish statement to say that feminism has done more harm than good at this point. It's not an outlandish statement to suggest that traditional masculinity is under attack. And it's not outlandish to suggest that gender inequality does not exist in Scotland. But apparently that's regressive.
No longer do we want to hear statements like, "Over my dead body will you play in my boys' football team? Girls don't play football," as 7-year-old Rachel Pavlov was told by her headmaster. She is now the Football Association's Development Manager for Diversity and Inclusion.
That's fantastic. I don't know who that woman is, and I don't know how old she is, but the fact of the matter is there, she referred to something that allegedly happened to a little girl, and now that little girl is an adult. So we're talking about decades ago, potentially, generations ago. Times have fucking changed. But these people live in the past. They live in the past in order to justify changing things in the present.
I started my career in HR in the 1980s and working with some truly inspirational women. I've seen firsthand how transformative diversity and inclusion policies can be in the workplace. I remember challenging male employees about the pornographic calendars in their workplaces long before The Sun stopped publishing page 3 photos in 2015. Slowly, we have chipped away at the casual misogyny that has characterised workplaces for decades.
All right, okay. Again, using misogyny when it's not really warranted. So in an office space, for example, where some men have nudie calendars, is that misogyny? Oh, fucking hell. Oh, Jesus, man.
Too long, employers have expected women to minimise their differences and adapt to the workplace rather than adapting the workplace to them.
Fucking, it's like the sense of entitlement that they've got. Suck it fucking up. Get on with it. You're not there to change the world. You're not there to change society. You're not there to change the work environment. You're there to do a job. Fucking hell.
So much female talent has been lost because of this draconian mindset. From pregnancy to parental leave, childcare to the menopause, we must do better at responding to these issues.
Draconian, what? You could make the argument there's many talented men out there in society, including politically minded men, that won't get a look in now because the Parliament has to make strides towards achieving so-called gender equality within the Parliament. You could also make the argument that many men, talented men, will lose out in the future due to all this talk of improving gender pay or reducing gender pay gaps in institutions and organizations, which amounts to hiring more women and promoting more women. So preferential treatments. Plenty of men are going to suffer as a result of that. And actually, in reference to Q Camp Stewart from earlier on, when she made reference to all these little babes that don't do very well in universities and colleges because of their white professors. What about all the white men or the white adolescent boys that don't even make it to university and college and drop out of school? You know, the demographic that's failing the most are every other group within society except for gypsies. That's a bit disingenuous anyway, because the vast majority of them don't even attend school and whatnot. But, you know, white boys on average are doing the worst across society. Where's the talk of that? Where's the talk of the drug death crisis in Scotland, Dundee in particular, the drug debt capital, the fuck it of Europe? And who do you think's making up the bulk of those deaths? It's men. Homelessness in Scotland, men. Three out of 4 is men. Suicides, men, mainly, but not a damn peep. And if there is a peep, they don't ever mention the gender /sex. No. It's only ever a gendered issue if they can promote feminism.
The Economist Glass Ceiling Index, the annual measure of the role and influence of women in the workforce across 29 OECD countries, ranks Great Britain well below average at number 22. That's simply not good enough. The World Economic Forum estimates that it will now take 135.6 years to reach gender equality as the COVID-19 pandemic set progress back by about 36 years.
Oh, well, just refer to the World Economic Forum, eh? If it's not the United Nations, it's the World Economic Forum. They always refer to these organizations and their fucking reports as if this is gospel truth. You know? These people are being exploited and used, and it's quite embarrassing on their behalf. I'm embarrassed for them, really, because they're useful idiots. They're pawns and they don't even realize it. Their feminist bullshit, their feminist delusions are being exploited by people with a lot of money and pretend, more often than not, have kippas on their fucking head. You know, Bill Gates said it best at a TED Talk, I believe. You know, we can reduce the population by 10 or 15% with better education, better health care for women. And when I meant education, I meant for women, or girls, I should say. You know, better contraception, vaccinations, etc., etc. The whole point of that is, though, that there's this push for gender equality, aka feminism, because they know damn well that that goes a long way in achieving a reduction in birth rates, not just in Scotland, but globally. That's what this is about. But in the meantime, in the process, as a result, by extension, we are stuck listening to this nonsense from these mongos who think that they're really onto something. They really think that their delusions are in actuality reality when they're not. They're only getting the opportunity to spout this shit off and pass policy, etc., and make strides towards achieving quote-unquote gender equality, because Sustainable Development Goal 5, I believe, is gender equality. You know, we need to achieve that sweet, sweet, sweet gender equality by 2030. You know? So how do we do that? Well, let's just get the feminists in to have a circle jerk in the parliament and pass policy, etc., to eradicate disparities, because that will somehow make the oppression dissipate.
Without measurement, there is no improvement. And I cannot emphasise enough how pivotal Theresa May's drive to compel companies to publish their gender pay gap data was in helping to improve workplace equality.
Again, gender pay gap and publishing the data. What that means is, when they say publishing the data, for anybody that's not aware, I know I'm probably preaching to the choir, publishing the data just simply means it's essentially pressurizing companies, because if they haven't showcased any improvement from their previous release of data the year prior, then they get very, very bare minimum browbeaten, but it could result in fines, etc., etc. So how do they reduce this gender pay gap? Well, they need to promote women. They need to hire more women, because how they seem to come to this fucking nonsense that there's a so-called gender pay gap in society is they will add up all the earnings of men within a specific company and all the earnings of women without taking into account the job roles that these people have. Now, they know themselves that that's a bit disingenuous, but what they're really angling for is to ensure that the women in that institution or that organization that are in the 9 times out of 10 lower paid roles within said institution are promoted into the boardrooms, in the managerial positions, etc. So they will earn more money, therefore reducing the gender pay gap. So again, they point to an institution and go, oh, the gender pay gap, that's another example of gender inequality. No, it's fucking not. It's not. But again, disparities and equity, two things that this government, every single bellend that calls himself a politician within said parliament, love to refer to.
As life increasingly returns to normal and the threat of the pandemic recedes, governments and businesses must work collaboratively to nurture female talent and find other innovative ways to promote equality in the workplace. This isn't about positive discrimination. It's about fairness.
No, it's not even positive discrimination. It's just discrimination. But I love that. So yeah, it's not positive discrimination. It's about fairness. I don't know.
Proud to be in a parliament made up of 45% women, but I do not take for granted that we in this chamber have so much more to do.
There's always more to do. There's always more to do. You know, it doesn't matter what subject we're talking about, whether it's racism, whether it's climate change, whether it's this shit. It's always a case of there's always more to do. Because there will always be more to do. Because if there wasn't anything more to do, then they wouldn't have anything to talk about. You know? It's as simple as that, really. There was another point I wanted to make there, but I've just had a memory blank and I can't remember what she was talking about.
I'm proud to be in a parliament made up of 45% women.
Oh, yeah, there. Right? Again, what women in that parliament is doing something that a man couldn't do? You know, the reality of the matter is, if there was women in that parliament that disagreed vehemently with this feminist shit, that wouldn't be acceptable. So it's not even a case of having more women in that parliament. It's a case of getting more feminists in the parliament. That's not diversity or equality. That's just simply shoehorning in more and more of your own fucking activists with the same worldview.
But I do not take for granted that we in this chamber have so much more to do to achieve equality in Scotland and in the world. I move the amendment in my name.
And on that note, I've gone on for long enough. I don't even know if there's anybody still watching, to be quite honest. But I don't know. I mean, it's entirely up to you. If you want me to continue with a couple of others, I can. Or if you want to go away and watch Bonnie Lads stream, because I realise I'm kind of clashing now, presumably. I'll leave it up to you. you want to bugger off, because I've been going on for over 2 hours now, like. But I think that's the gist of it anyway, really. Fucking boots, man, honestly. Oh, wow. Let me see. The more women they send to work, the more the family system breaks down and lower. You're absolutely right. I've said this before in the videos that I've made, like that we're living in a moment in time where, especially in the case of Scotland, the birth rate is at a record low. Admittedly, 2021 it's seen a slight increase, but prior to that, it was at the lowest it's ever been since records began in 1855. So when you've got that as a backdrop, simultaneously alongside that, you've got a government that's pushing consistently, and this isn't new, this has been going on for some time, feminist policy, desperate to infiltrate every aspect of academia to promote feminism, empower little girls, get them into STEM, etc., etc. You know? And there's no talk of family, there's no promotion of motherhood, there's none of that shit. It's all about getting women into the best positions possible to see them climb that career ladder quicker than they ordinarily would. So what this does, the feminists don't seem to realize that they're being empowered by, as I said earlier on, like the people that have the big bucks, your Bill Gates, etc., your WEF, your United Nations. They're doing this globally to most, especially in Western countries. They're promoting feminism, funding feminism, and ensuring that feminism is talked about constantly 24/7 because they know damn well that it will ensure that birth rates continue to decline. The feminists, whether or not they realize that, but that is what is happening. It's ensuring that the birth rates continue to stay as they are or potentially get worse. Yeah. God forbid we even talk up the concept of marriage and whatnot. No, we can't do that because it's all about empowering women. It's a fucking joke. Are you away, Faith? Oh, well, I think that answers that then. Everybody's away. Slim's away. Who else have we got? Davey's still here. Fuck Claire Schwab. Nah, he's a great guy, man. What are you talking about? Like, you're a fucking dickhead, him, like, you know. Total dickhead. Diversity. Can't stand the word diversity. I can't stand it either, but I'm sick of it. Especially, it's like, especially now, back in the day, it just meant less white. Now it just means every group possible, bar straight, able-bodied white men. You know, I'm getting to a point where I'm actually starting to get fucking sick to fucking death of how obvious it's becoming that our demographic are deliberately being castigated, which kind of incidentally goes back to the point made earlier on in relation to traditional masculinity being under attack. Because what better way to ensure that, you know, there isn't what's the fucking word? That Scotland doesn't see a resurgence in the days of old than to ensure that the one group of people that could see that happen, which is our men, to ensure that they are disenfranchised, to ensure that they're deracinated, to ensure that they're nothing like their ancestors, you know, because historically it would have been the men that would have fought for change. Historically, it would have been the men that might even have picked up arms if they had arms, etc., and decided to overthrow their government, whatever it may be, you know. So they're just ensuring that men can't be men can't be warriors, men can't be fighters, etc. Men can't be what made them men in the fucking first place. You know. And it's already happening anyway with your feminized education. Too many female teachers, don't hear them calling for more men. Nope. So we've got a feminized education, and the results are constant referrals to everything feminism related. And as a result, and this isn't just in Scotland, this is UK wide, white boys and white teenage boys and white student age boys / men, adolescents, etc., on average are failing more than every other group in society. So they're already on a winner there. And then in Scotland, in the case of Scotland, as I said earlier on, suicides, etc., drug deaths, homelessness, the end result for many men. Inverness, where I'm from, and the Highlands in general, is the suicide Like, that's been the most suicides in Scotland. I know quite a few people that have committed suicide over the years. I know a few others that have died due to drugs. It's a shame, you know. I've been in some dark places myself throughout my life in terms of depression and whatnot, and a lot of it has derived from the fact that, like, sometimes it's been fucking difficult. Mental health is a major issue for young men in society, and there's just fuck all for us. And then you have to turn on your TV or you have to turn on YouTube and go to the Parliament and hear them berate men all day long. It's fucking tiresome. It's tiresome. Robert Ingram. I don't even know who's still here. 9 people are still watching, but horse racing. Right. Okay. James Rankin. Their ideological hatred of traditional rules is the reality of the virtue of those rules. Mm-hmm. It's so apparent as well. Like, they're like constantly going after it. They don't want any semblance of what made society tick in the past to exist today. It just can't happen. Anyway, I think I'll leave it at that note. Well, evening all. I didn't know the stream was on tonight. Well, I'm in a debate whether or not to call it a night now, because I realise I'm probably clashing my Bonnie Lad stream, and I did ask the chat whether or not they want me to continue going through some more of these feminists, but nobody actually responded, so I don't know. Let's see what's what. But on my streams, they tend to be relatively impromptu. I don't have a standard time for doing streams. And incidentally, I only plan to do an hour, and here I am fucking 2.5 hours later. Education is doing a number on our kids. Absolutely. Like, that's one thing I've paid a lot of attention to over the years in Scotland, in particular is the education. Scottish Family Party does quite a lot of good work and bringing attention to the LGBT side of things, but I've paid a lot of attention to it myself for different reasons, like the United Nations side of things, UNESCO, sustainability, learning for sustainability, etc., etc. Like, it really is just, it's more about politicizing children at this point and turning them into activists than it is about teaching them anything of worth, you know. And it's so apparent, like, all they are doing is essentially promoting every single progressive talking point and progressive agenda to children. Climate change being the most compelling example. No wonder Scottish education is plummeting down the world rankings as the years have gone on. All under the S&P's fucking watch, of course. But, yeah. It's just a damn shame, like, but I don't know. I think I'll leave it at that then, folks. Thank you very much for tuning in, but I don't really think there's much desire to see me continue, and it doesn't put me up no down, to be honest, because every single feminist that I have to watch for any length of time, my brain cells started to deplete. So on that note, hi, catch you later. Peace.